Then, Kanti, you're going to kick us off, right?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. I'm Kanti Shrikant, the Staff Director for the Transportation Planning Board. I welcome members of the TPB along with several guests from the TPB's member agencies. So the guests are really staffs to the local, regional, and state transportation agencies, many of the board members will be familiar with them. This work session is something new that we are trying this year, and I'm eager to learn what works and what improvements we can make for the next time. I don't know, Chairman Allen, you might recall the last time we did a major update of the long-range plan in 2018, you were the chair. And at that time, you noted to me that, look, the schedule of activities for the review of the inputs to conformity is very compressed. Oftentimes, there isn't enough time during the board meeting. Things go by very fast. So it would really be good to have a bit more time. So we said, okay, let's do something this time. So for this update, we've added 1 extra month to the schedule. And we have also added this 90 extra minutes of work session to give more board members a forum to just discuss this one topic. So hopefully this works, and we will, if what improvements we can make, we'll continue to learn from this. So today's work session is being held actually in the middle of a public review and comment period. So just as members of the public are reviewing these documents that we'll be sharing with you today, the board members will be seeing it at the same time. The public comment period ends May 3rd. So we are more or less in the middle of that period. Unlike in the previous times, the board will not be asked to take action on these proposed changes next month. Rather, next month will be devoted for the members to simply review the comments that were received and what responses the agencies have for those comments. So once again, I welcome all of you, board members and agency staffs. And by the way, the board members can remain signed on to this WebEx at the end of the work session, and we will transition into the monthly board meeting. And also, this session is being broadcast live on the TPB's YouTube channel. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Mr. Allen.
Great, thank you, Kanti. Appreciate that. Turn to Stacy just a little bit, but I'll just start real fast with a couple of comments. I think it's particularly important that we're having this extra time, as you noted, so that we can collectively review the proposed updates to our long-range transportation plan. As you know, this information is also available for the public to review, so I think it's important for the board to ensure that we and the public have full information and can fully understand what it is that we're being asked to approve. And then, Kanti, what I was going to do, I guess, first was, do you want me to turn to you to give an overview of walking through the actions that we're going to be taking in the process for the update? And then I had a couple of comments before we then turn to Stacy.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to do that. Thank you, Mr. Allen. So where we are today, we are beginning the process of updating the long-range transportation plan, or Visual S 2045, as we call it, to comply with the federal requirement. MPOs like the TPB have to update their plans at least once every 4 years. So the last time we updated this plan was 2018 when you were the chair, and now we have to complete this update in 2022. Now, since our region has not attained the federal ozone standards, we are required to first perform a technical analysis called the air quality conformity analysis before we can adopt an updated plan. So the air quality analysis is done to estimate the level of ozone-related emissions from the on-road transportation in future years. And the update, the plan can be adopted only after this analysis shows that the ozone emissions are going to be below the levels previously set for our region that we call the emissions budget. So where the TPB is at this time today, we are reviewing what projects should be included in this air quality analysis. We are not adopting the updated plan yet. The air quality analysis that first has to be done takes about 9 months, and staff will begin that work. And at the end of that process, the results of that analysis has to be released for public comments. And only after that will the TPB be able to adopt an updated long-range transportation plan. And that will be in June of next year. So the second thing to remember about this process is with regard to the review, which projects should be included in the air quality analysis, this is a review of all of the projects that are in the long-range transportation plan, not just the new projects that have been proposed to be included in the analysis, or is it just a review of the changes proposed to the existing projects? This review covers even those projects that are in the current plan, which have been in the plan for many years, for which no changes have been proposed. All of this list, the complete list, has been released for public comments. So as such, this is the time for the board to ask questions about any and all of the projects that would be included in the air quality analysis. The questions about the project cost, about the source of funding, the schedule, or the scope of the project. Members can reevaluate their own perspectives on how best any of these projects complements the board's policy priorities. Based on all of this, they can then take an action on which projects would be included in the air quality analysis. So it's useful to remember that the TPB has a comprehensive set of socioeconomic environmental policy priorities. It's not just one policy priority. While the TPB can act to remove projects from the list that goes into the conformity analysis, the board will not be able to make changes to a project or add projects without the agreement of the agency that has the responsibility to fund, implement, operate, and maintain the project. So it can remove projects, but it cannot add or change without the implementing agency supporting that. So the third and the last point to remember about this process is this 4-year update that we talked about. That's federally required, but that is a minimum period between updates. And that means the TPB can update its plan more frequently. In fact, most of the TPB's tenure, the plan has been amended almost on an annual basis. For example, the 2018 long-range plan, Visualize 2045, was amended in 2020. So the TPB can adopt an updated plan now in 2022, and it can continue to work to make improvements to the plan and come back in 2023 and amend it again. It can come back again in 20. So what would trigger such amendments could be anything that the board decides is a substantive change that it wishes to make to the plan. For example, there could be changes in federal funding. We know that the federal reauthorization of the transportation bill is due. The president has proposed some new infrastructure funding. So those things can provide additional projects or programming opportunities. We might want to come back and do that. Some of the federal and state policies could shift its focus from current projects and programs. So there might be, whether it is climate change, whether it is equity, whether it is state of good repair, any of these triggers that the board decides is a substantive change, the board can initiate an amendment to the plan. It's not required, there's no federal requirements or limitations on that. So in a way that makes sense, because the long-range transportation plan is it's not etched in stone. Rather, it's a living document that is continually being worked on to reflect the current realities and priorities. So those were the 3 points that would be helpful to remember in terms of where we are in this process now. Thank you, Mr. Allen.
Got it. Yeah, thank you, Kanti. Appreciate that. I'm going to turn to Stacy in a second, but I want to share a little bit first. Board members will have an opportunity today to share any comments that they may have with colleagues and staff, and importantly, to pose questions members may have on the new and existing projects in the plan to those transportation agencies. I believe we've got a representative from each member transportation agency attending the work session today, where we can help clarify as needed. And then next month is when we'll receive a summary of all the comments and questions both from us and the public, and the responses from the transportation agencies. Stacy's going to get the review started and summarize the materials that have been provided to us. And these are the same materials the public received earlier this month as well. And before we do that, though, I do want to note, I think, at least for me, one overarching question that I'm going to have is about the completeness of the information that we're getting today, and before we get asked to approve a draft of the plan in June. I think there's a number of projects where the information just seems missing or incomplete. Most importantly, some of the projects assert they're going to reduce VMT or GHG emissions, but there's not a great deal of information about exactly how that's going to happen. So as we walk through the projects today, I want to be sure that we understand what information we do, as well as what we do not have, and how we can ensure that both the board members and the public have that information before we get asked to approve anything. This relates to a conversation we had at the last steering committee meeting where we discussed whether and how TPB could actually request from US DOT an extension for our time to submit stages of the plan. Because what I'm concerned about is that we're in kind of a chicken and egg situation. That once we get through some of our analyses, it's going to be too late to change the projects until we get through that next round. So I think it's important today that we have an understanding of when and how we get full information and whether that might require any extensions for us. So with that, let me turn now to Stacy, who's going to give us, I think, a staff summary and walk us through the initial pieces. So Stacy, let me turn to you.
Hey, before we go there, could I quickly ask a question, Chairman Allen?
Sure.
Yeah, it's Emmett Jordan from the city of Greenbelt. I just wanted to be clear about what the framework that Conti Shrikant presented. Just to be clear, so the inclusion or removal of items in the conformity analysis cannot be added, nothing to be added or removed without the implementation agency supporting that action. And by that, you mean DDOT, VDOT, or MDOT. Is that correct?
Hey, Tom.
Just one clarification. The board can remove projects.
Yeah,
It does not require the implementing agency's consent approval to remove a project. That is a collective decision of the board. In June, when the board is scheduled to approve what projects would get included in the air quality conformity analysis, during that time, the board will take a vote and the majority vote will decide which projects get included in the air quality conformity analysis. And at that time, if the consensus of the board is to leave some projects out of the analysis at this time because there isn't enough information on that set of projects, or the board believes that that project does not completely advance some of its priorities, whatever their reasons are, they could do that. The only point I was trying to make is it cannot add replacement projects into the plan on its own. That doesn't come from an agency that says, here is the money, I'm going to put this money in, I'm going to do this project. That's what I was trying to say.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So by implementing agency, you're referring to VDOT, DDOT, or MDOT. Is that correct?
Those are some of the agencies. We have projects that are put forth by local jurisdictions. So, many projects are funded with a combination of local funds and state funds. So there is a joint responsibility on those projects. So which agency has the ultimate responsibility kind of depends on the project and varies a little bit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Jordan. All right, Stacy, let me turn to you now.
Great. Well, good morning to members of the board and our transportation experts throughout the region. We thank you both for being here today. I'd like to go ahead and go to the next slide. Let's go back for one moment. I will have a brief presentation to set up the planning process, just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing as we have this important discussion on the proposed and existing transportation projects that are the inputs to our air quality conformity analysis for Visualize 2045 in the TIP. Following my presentation, we will review projects first that are in the District of Columbia. I will take questions from our board members in the same way that we typically do during our board meetings, where we ask, for example, board members of the District of Columbia to speak. Then we might move on to Virginia, then to Maryland, so that we can have some organization to the question and answers. There's an opportunity to issue comments today or to ask questions, to have a rigorous conversation about the questions, such as those Chair Allen just described. How are these projects addressing TPB policy priorities? This is a chance to ask those questions, and our technical members will do their best to respond to questions today succinctly, but we will also work with them to develop more extensive responses if necessary following this meeting. So we certainly welcome the questions and the opportunity to have that discussion. So that will begin shortly. First, I have a few slides to go over to help set the stage and review our process. Next slide, please. Great. So Mr. Sukanth has already discussed the importance of our timeline and meeting federal requirements in order to ensure that we have a plan submitted so that federal funding can continue to flow. Next slide, please. So you've seen this before, but I think it's worth revisiting at this point in time the process of how projects end up in the air quality conformity analysis. And so the first step is we set a vision at TPB. That's our board members' role with input from the community to develop that vision that was first set in 1998 and has evolved over time. Right? So you develop a policy framework with many goals and objectives, and more recently, your resolutions on equity, climate, and safety. But we have many policy priorities, and TPB staff evaluate system performance and report that back to you across a whole range of performance measures, from access to transit to reliability and delay on the transportation system and many other measures. You've worked with our staff through studies and analysis to develop the aspirational initiatives and other types of strategies, as found from our recent climate strategies, to focus on to help us achieve these many policy priorities. Then it's back to the local member agencies where they do the planning, project development, engineering and design, which is all the local role. And then those are submitted after going through a local vetting process where those projects go out for comment, public comment. Many of our technical agencies across the region have projects out for public comment now. After that, those projects are then submitted to TPB for inclusion in the air quality conformity analysis, especially required if they impact capacity on the system, taking a lane, adding a lane, or otherwise impacting capacity. And also if they use federal funds, generally they're required. So this is an important process, and this is where it goes back to that policy framework. And we can have a conversation about how these projects not only meet local needs, but address our whole range of policy priorities that we have. Next slide, please. So we've been asked, what really is Visualize 2045? Well, there's two parts to the plan. The constrained element that has many different constraints that I'll mention next. And then there's the rest of the plan, where we have our vision and goals, where we talk about the challenges that we face today, such as COVID, making meaningful change towards equity, dealing with climate change and working together to stop it. Factors we must consider for the future, such as the advance of technologies and how to ensure that they help us meet our goals rather than create new hurdles. And then we document those strategies for a better future. We document our aspirational initiatives, safety strategies, and with the climate change mitigation study of 2021, like with some of our other climate strategies, we will be documenting those in the long range plan as well. Next slide, please. So back to the constraints. As Mr. Sukanth noted, our plan can have a big vision, but our conformity analysis must adhere to a series of constraints, as well as the overall plan that we submit. It's subject to fiscal constraint. So while there's some great BRT planning and other types of planning going on in the region, we must only include projects that have revenue to cover the project list. So it's fiscally constrained. We must look out at least a 20-year minimum. We do. And then there's all of the requirements regarding the air quality conformity analysis. Not only what projects must be included, but how we conduct our analysis. We do not use an aspirational land use scenario. That would not be something we could submit to the federal government. We use our most recently approved cooperative forecasts that are based on the best forecasts that our planning directors across the region bring together. We must use reliable data and reasonable assumptions, and those will all be documented in the scope of work that Jane Posey presents later today during the TPB agenda item. And moreover, there are issues related to funding availability and silos when it comes to constraints. Not only do we have a mature transportation system, it's an amazing transportation system that we have in this region, multimodal in many ways, but about 80% of our funding goes to maintaining that system. And the funding that's remaining is subject to silos, so we can't just swap funds from one project to another across project types. There are many limitations. So I think this is all just important to keep in mind as we move forward with this conversation. Next slide, please. And so we ask what's in the constrained element. It's these things of which we spoke, but it is a subset of all of the work in all of the regional projects, and it is a subset of the projects in our plan. When we ask how is our plan implemented, next slide, please. The vision that you have as a board is bold, right? You're looking to address equity, climate, safety, and many other policy priorities. We can't do it alone in the constrained element. That is a subset of all of the work and all of the projects. What do you find inside the constrained element? We've talked about that, but outside of it, we have our land use plans and goals. TPB has said that land use is one of our most effective transportation strategies, and that shows up in the analyses. Pilot projects, telework, the state implementation plans, and many bicycle and pedestrian projects do not end up in our constrained element. And we've had the question asked, well, shouldn't we? We have some projects that we could put in that are bicycle and pedestrian projects. And the reality is our regional tools do not necessarily have the capability to evaluate those. And we also don't want that constrained element to become a laundry list of every project in the region. It wouldn't be manageable, and it wouldn't really be useful to the analysis. But we do have a bicycle and pedestrian plan being updated and a new database that will be released within the year. So we're excited to share that to help communicate about the good work that's happening there. Next slide, please. Moreover, as far as the constrained element that we're talking about today and the aspirational initiatives implementation, we have 7 aspirational initiatives. There's 8 bullets. I split them into 2 buckets here. One of those initiatives is split, but the bottom line is there are a handful of our initiatives which will be implemented mostly outside of the Visualized 2045 constrained element. But other projects like making those investments in Metro Rail, Express Highway Network, bus rapid transit, and other types of options for commuting can be found within the constrained element. Next slide, please. We've had questions about how does the climate change mitigation study impact this plan, right? That's an important question. I know we're all very focused on meeting our climate goals and tackling that head on. This study will build on our past studies that have demonstrated many different strategies. The strategies that come out of this study will be captured within the strategy section of the long range plan. Will it be a thumbs up, thumbs down on individual projects? Are we going to be doing individual project evaluation through this? That's not how the study will work. But we will learn many different strategies that we can continue to work toward as a region. Next slide, please. And you'll see that those two, the study and the plan, will really merge about December of 2020 of this year, 2021 of this year, as we finalize, as we move forward with both the plan and the study into the new year. So we have numerous studies. For more than a decade, we've been studying how to address climate change and what strategies can help get us there. And we want to keep our eye on the prize, that we've learned things from the What Would It Take multi-sector working group studies and analysis that look directly at climate change. And then the long range plan task force, where you said the congestion and delay, the level of access that people have in our region is not acceptable, and what can come out of that. And so the aspirational initiatives that you endorsed as a result of that study actually reflect a lot of the strategies of the What Would It Take and multi-sector working group analyses. And you can see that some of those strategies that are the aspirational initiatives will be found in the constrained element, as shown in the right set of bullets under findings. But many other findings from these studies will not be found in the constrained element. That doesn't mean we can't take action on them today. And to be frank, if you look at the analysis of the aspirational initiatives, you'll see the VMT and GHG reductions are very minor differentials of those various aspirational initiatives. Whereas the most impactful and feasible studies are those you see listed under the programs and policies, such as VMT tax and parking fees, operations and eco-driving, land use policies and plans and telework policies. And so it's good to keep in mind what we're learning from these different studies and where and how we can apply them. Next slide, please. So as I wrap up, we've started speaking about what we call our planning policy focus areas. Basically, when you look at our policy framework, we've condensed it down to these terms: accessibility, economy, equity, safety, resiliency, right, and sustainability with the climate change. And the projects that we're discussing today are not each going to address all of these. Many of our projects that have the most impact on equity and livability may have little impact on GHG or VMT reduction. And so we have to understand the constant negotiation of trade-offs of all of the policies that we focus. And I encourage us to have that conversation today and our technical experts to speak to those, which policy priorities they address with the projects that we're talking about. But the bottom line is what we do at TPB is we look at how all of those projects work together as a whole to address the various policy priorities that we measure for you. Next slide, please. So just a couple quick notes. We are seeing change in the last 20 years, up until from 2001 to 2019. We have seen driving alone decrease by 13 percentage points and transit's gone up. Active travel has doubled and telework tripled even before the pandemic. Next slide, please. We have seen from our 2045 forecast with the 2018 plan, an increase in population and proximity for jobs and housing to high capacity transit. And we need to keep our focus on building that new housing and activity centers and near transit in order to realize those results. Next slide, please. And the last slide here or two is just that land use changes alone, when evaluated, showed a 20% increase in access to jobs based on our 2045 analysis with the 2018 plan. And when you add the transportation projects to that, next slide, that's another 20% percentage points increase. So there's a very important relationship there. And so as we move forward with this discussion, I encourage you to think about these trade-offs in mind, about all of our policy priorities, and to have a robust discussion about what each project offers. Next slide, please. Just a quick note of examples of projects that have been recently implemented. I'm going to move past that at this point. And so now we'll get to our facilitated review. What I will be doing at this point is asking our board members to make their comments and questions in the order that we've described. Before we do, before we begin our review, I do want to note that our 2020 board chair, Ms. Kelly Russell, did submit 2 questions. And I'd like to acknowledge those questions, which we have responded to her by email at this point, but we thought we'd share them with you as well today because it may be useful to this conversation. And so I'll finish those and then we'll begin our review of the DC projects. Ms. Russell noted, and I'm just going to read these to you at this point, there are some very large road projects in here, referring to the air quality conformity analysis inputs. Will there be any indication as to whether road projects are on net harmful to our pollution, climate, and safety goals? And so the staff response is that the TPB's regional air quality conformity analysis will provide an estimate of ozone-related emissions and greenhouse gases in future years that the region can expect with all of the proposed roadway and transit improvements and projects in the land use, along with the land use and growth in population and households. This estimate, however, is not at an individual project level. Rather, it will be from all of the several hundred roadway and transit projects that are reflected in the analysis, along with the projected growth, and that's across the 23 member jurisdictions over nearly 3,500 square miles. We do want to mention that typically large projects are required, whether by state or federal process, to conduct a project level planning analysis. And TPB member agencies conduct such analyses, and they would be able to provide information on net impact on pollution or safety. So we know, for example, that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, through Smart Scale, projects that are requesting state or regional funds do have to show how those projects perform according to some criteria. In response to Mr. Allen, and the information that we provide in our comment period packet, we do have a summary memorandum. Following that, there are 3 tables, table 1, 2, and 3, that show how the major projects proposed, there are 2 major projects proposed and 2 existing projects that have experienced significant changes, how those correspond to our goals, aspirational initiatives, and the federal planning factors. There are also another 16 projects or so that we called out due to their having a little bit more anticipated level of impact on the air quality conformity analysis, that we also reported on their information in the same matrix. So you can see those. We do report this at a qualitative level. We do not have a quantitative assessment of each of these projects. The feasibility of that would be quite challenging. We are working with our members across the region presently to develop tables such as these for all of the projects. We have a lot of the information we have many questions answered for some of the projects, but we're working to complete that with them for all and expect to bring that back to you. So the second question that was asked by Ms. Russell for this event was as follows. Are projects that improve walking and biking access to transit subject to any additional quality check? So does TPB do a quality check on those projects? She notes an unprotected bike lane on a 45-mile-an-hour road that's been widened does not necessarily improve access. And so the staff response is that at TPB, as part of its process, there are 2 checks that are done for all projects. These are not just for walk and bike projects, but these are at a high level, and that's not an engineering and design level. That's back at the local agency. The first check we do is funding. Before the project can be added to the TIP, we work with agencies to determine that funding is available and committed or reasonably expected to be provided. And the second we do is whether or not it impacts air quality conformity by taking away a lane, for example. And if so, we have to make sure that project is in our air quality conformity analysis. Any checks on the designing, facilities, the safety features are not typically reviewed by TPB. If a member brings a project that is either in the TIP or proposed to be added to the TIP that is not supportive of our policies, then TPB can write to the agency and even withhold adding the project, which is needed to advance the project if it has federal funds. The TPB has said that protected bike lanes provide the most safety, especially on major roadways, and encourages member jurisdictions to pursue that type of policy. So I know that was a lot from me, but I hope that that's useful information to all of you and worth time to share those additional questions. At this point in time, we'll be taking questions. Well, let's just take a moment to go and review the comment period materials. Next slide. What has been made available to you at the beginning of this month is the comment period packet. That includes a memorandum with an overview of all of the major projects that has a background and a summary, including some maps. Then I mentioned the matrices that are included, major project profiles that highlight the changes or information about those major projects. And I think it's worth noting, this is an update. We still have the same horizon year. There's not a lot of new money. So in 2018, there were 18 new projects. And in all reality, we have 2 major new projects right now. It's an update. It's not a major advance to a new horizon, for example. So I think that's probably just worth noting. Additionally, there are project description sheets about the projects that are in the plan for those that are in the matrix. And then also the air quality conformity table and scope of work. The conformity table shows lots of the small little changes, an adjustment to a completion year and such. So with that, knowing you've taken some time to look at this, We'll begin taking questions on projects that are in the District of Columbia. DDOT staff are prepared to answer questions, and I'll begin with any questions from the board members that are in the District of Columbia, and I'll take a question or comment and then direct it to the appropriate person at the agency. Are there any questions from the District of Columbia? Mr. Allen.
Thanks. The question I was going to ask is when we look at for the H and I Street bus lanes, one of the things I'm trying to make sure I understand is how or in what ways we have both estimated, but what evidence shows us what the impact is going to be on our VMT and our greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. Ms. Kennedy, will you take that question, please?
Sure, happy to. Megan Carnegie, Bus Priority Program Manager for DDOT. I would say that we are not doing any technical analysis to estimate the greenhouse gas emissions or VMT reduction as a result of our bus priority projects typically. That's beyond the scope of what we're typically doing. I think we know from best practices that these are part of kind of overall trying to shift folks to taking transit and making transit faster and more reliable. But I do not have that information. If that is something that is going to be necessary, then we'll have to circle back on how we can try to provide some estimates.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions for the District of Columbia?
I have one quick follow-up if I could, which was to Megan. So the bus priority lanes is obviously foundational theory behind it, which I think also bears out in best practices, is that we're going to be able to move more people on bus transit. And so do I understand that there hasn't been an analysis of how we'll see either mode shift or other ways that people are going to be able to choose that mode because we're making it a more efficient as well as a better transit experience that also then reduces vehicle miles traveled if they had chosen to drive, solo occupancy vehicles or carpooling in?
I would say that we haven't done that specific analysis for this project. H and I Street, as you probably are aware, we have existing lanes out there. This is really kind of an upgrade to that design based on what we learned during the pilot period to help make it work better, reduce delays from right turning vehicles, provide a second bus lane in a couple locations where we have buses laying over in the curb lane. And then to kind of more directly respond to your question, I think that other cities, like New York City, have found that ridership in Seattle, ridership increased, maybe on the magnitude of 10% on corridors where they really made dedicated, investments in bus priority. They typically are doing kind of, corridors that are several miles long, and that's when they're seeing that kind of scale. They're seeing those ridership gains. For H and I Street, the analysis that we have pre-COVID was showing that we're seeing travel time benefits on about 10% across different times of day, which I think is pretty fabulous for, cheap paint going in rather quickly. And so we're going to be working with WMATA to analyze how this new design is working. As you know, lots of routes are coming from across the city and converging on H and I and may only be on for a couple of blocks. So in some ways, it's also reliability benefits. Trying to WMATA has also seen that kind of the worst delays are also mitigated with the pilot lanes that are out there now. So which also affects people's ability to rely on transit as a real choice for them. So I really appreciate your question. I think we haven't done that detailed modeling for DC specific projects yet. Something we can certainly look into, and probably something we should be monitoring as we try to roll out more of these types of improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Mr. Shaw, I see that your hand is up, is that correct?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Megan, for coming in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just overarching, I'm going to have the same set of questions for all of our jurisdictions, regardless of mode, regardless of operator or sponsor. And my questions are really built around my responsibility and our responsibility as board members to execute the process that we have laid out and to be diligent and making sure that we follow the own letter of our own laws. And so to that extent, I'm really looking for completeness and accuracy in the submissions for all of the project sponsors. And so in this regard, Megan, I'm not asking you to come, and I won't ask anyone today to try and make up stuff that they don't have with them, but just to let you know that in June, when the list of projects is brought forth for consideration, I'm going to be looking to make sure that questions that were required in the technical input solicitations guide have been answered. And if there's incomplete information, it would be irresponsible of me as a board member to move to include these projects in the next phase of our rigor if completeness hasn't been achieved. So in that regard, I do think that there has been some information given, Ms. Carnegie, about the H&I bus lanes, and I appreciate that you're going to circle back with us and provide the additional evidence for the VMT and GHG reductions as is required in question 40. I don't believe that level of completeness has been given to date for 16th Street. I'm confident that you have it, and that when these come back for consideration by the board, that we'll be able to receive that in the information provided by DDOT. So thank you for that, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Carnegie.
Okay, I just wanted to follow up on that, and I'll work with our staff to make sure we're giving you the information that's required. But I think, oh, apologies, I don't know if you lost my video there. I think doing that modeling for individual projects, we'll just need to look into kind of what the implications are of that for delivery of these projects. I think we all want to achieve more projects that help move transit faster, for example, and be another requirement. So if it's better to just not claim that we're going to be reducing VMT or greenhouse gas emissions, maybe that's simpler, but I'll work with my staff at DDOT to make sure we get the information, or if we need to set up additional technical processes to be better respond. But I don't know that we've done a VMT model for 16th Street, for example. So I don't want the impression that I'll be able to get you that number. It's not just sitting in a file that I can pull out easily for you.
Okay.
Circle back.
And again, I'm not anyone, but for my fellow board members, I'm a transit person, but I'm going to demand of my transit advocates the same rigor as my non-transit colleagues here. It's not about having it or not having it. It's a requirement as part of this process. So we'll work with you, friends at DDOT, to make sure that the projects you submit comply with the requirements for this process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up on a couple of points that Shyam made, because he said that this would be applicable to all. It would be useful to clarify a couple of things. So is the expectation from the board, or at least from Shyam, that by June, all 500 projects will have quantitative estimates of VMT and greenhouse gas reductions? Or is the expectation that it can be qualitative or quantitative, whatever is available? That's
expectation. So, but why don't we go
I
into
just have one more point, Shyam. And then the other thing is, or is the expectation that this should be for new projects that are being proposed to be added? And the only reason I say that is, as Megan's answer clearly indicates, when we ask them these questions, many agencies have responded to them based on a general expectation or general proof of concept or a general planning level understanding. We can reach out to them, give them an additional 30 days or 60 days time by June to give us the quantitative or qualitative estimate. But if a quantitative estimate is required, then I don't know if by June we will be able to get all of those quantitative estimates. It's just the point I'm trying to make.
I understand. I think the intent here is to allow the project sponsors to make a reasonable case, but to ensure that if we've asked a question for specific, let's get into the jurisdictional pieces, Mr. Srikanth, because my litmus test is completeness. And if the submission information we're receiving today is incomplete, that's a worry stone for me. I know we're running short on time already. Do you want me to, Mr. Chairman, do you want me to weigh in
I-
on this, or should
well,
we proceed?
Yeah, so I would say I'm very much aware of the time, but a very hard stop because we have our actual TPB meeting that we have to start on time. And the DC's portion, at least on the agenda, was supposed to have gone at 10:45. So we're 30 minutes already. So we have other jurisdictions I want to make sure we get to. I think there is a larger question, Mr. Shrikant, that you were kind of teeing up a little bit. And I think that if we were to dive into that at this moment, it's what we're going to talk about all the way until 12 o'clock. So I think it'd be a better use of our time to kind of work our way through the jurisdictions to make sure we have a chance for those questions and for the answers as complete as we can get them today. And if it ends up that we actually need additional work time or an additional work session, we can consider that as well. But if that's okay with everybody, I'd prefer to make sure we kind of keep working our way through the projects.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Allen. With that, if there's one more question for DC, we can take it. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next jurisdiction. Okay, hearing none, we'll be moving on to questions on projects in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Leo, would you please bring up the slide of the presentation for a moment on the Virginia slide? So as we mentioned, there are a few new projects that are considered major projects. The one that has been identified as a major project for this update is in Loudoun County, Virginia, to construct a new 4-lane road for completion in 2029, which is the North Collector Road to US 50. And so if you would take down the slide at this point, I will take questions, starting with any board members from the Commonwealth of Virginia, please. I see Ms. Wheeler's hand up, and then Mr. Snyder.
Two quick questions. One, and I sort of asked this before, I know people mentioned activity centers earlier. Our activity centers are, I'm going to say not out of date, but we've added, for instance, a 2,000 spot commuter lot or 2 different commuter lots that have feeders into the HOT lane that buses are going to use. How do we get new designations for activity centers? Because that really is sort of a major activity center for us. And the second is, I understand the idea of vehicle miles traveled, and I assume there's going to be some economic weighing to the fact that jurisdictions like Prince William County don't have the mass transit. Unless everybody wants to commit billions of dollars to put the transit out here, we don't have the choice of going to transit. And so I'm hoping that those two concepts can be addressed, unless somebody wants billions of dollars to put the transit out to Prince William County. Because right now we are doing, the HOT lanes are basically geared toward commuters and slugging and commuter buses. And I'm just trying to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Mr. Chair, I can answer the first question, not the second one. That's more of a policy. On the activity centers, there are 141 regionally recognized regional activity centers, which do not preclude additional local jurisdictions having their own additional activity centers that follows the local metrics or criteria. So the 141 was something that took the region a little more than 2 years to develop consensus around a set of metrics. And right now there isn't any plans to revisit them. But when we do, that would be an opportunity to revisit the criteria that was used and the number of activity centers. But I want to make clear that none of that, those 141 does not preclude any local jurisdiction saying this is our own activity center.
Yes. Thank you for your question and comment. We'll go to Mr. Snyder and then to Ms. Rochelle.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. The board did take action on VMT reporting, and I think it will be critically important for each project, certainly the major ones, to be able to justify itself in terms of the VMT standard, not only today, but in the context of induced congestion, which is widely recognized. Secondly, my question to Virginia is, have you taken all the projects as a whole and determine their impact on air quality and other standards such as VMT? And if not, why not?
Mr. Snyder, this is Maria Sina with VDOT. We are currently doing our update to our VTrans long-range plan. And we can check into that plan to see if they have done that type of analysis. However, we do also rely on the TPB performance report after the CLRP is complete. And I could defer to Kanti to explain more on that. But I will check on whether the VTrans document does address that.
Right. So I just want to make sure we're playing our part in terms of meeting the greenhouse gas and VMT provisions. I also want to express interest in that things are moving very rapidly toward a more urgent and aggressive approach to environmental quality, whether some like it or not. And I'm concerned about a set of plans that are obsolete the minute that they're approved in their failure to meet air quality standards that we've set for ourselves and that will be increasingly aggressively set by others for us. So I really am interested in the major projects, compliance with the VMT criteria set forth by this board, and then more that Virginia is playing its role in that our collection of projects, and there may be cases where projects are needed to assist the outlying jurisdictions that the inner core jurisdictions don't need, and vice versa. But I want to make sure that Virginia is contributing in terms of meeting very aggressive air quality GHG standards as part of the larger region. So it's both a collective issue and an individual project by project issue as I see it. And VDOT, do you have any reaction to what I'm saying?
Yes, Mr. Snyder. In fact, yesterday our CTB had a presentation regarding this specific topic, and I can send you the link to the presentation. It talked about environmental stewardship in general, how the current administration is collaborating with other administrations as well. And in relationship to the greenhouse gases specifically, they are picking into some pilot projects to start doing those analyses, project specific. So I can send you that information. Definitely this administration in Virginia is committed to help reducing the greenhouse gases as well as BMT as a network approach.
So just to conclude, in order for me to approve the collection of projects proposed by Virginia, I want to make sure that Virginia is playing its role in meeting all of our objectives with a special emphasis on greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.
No,
Thank you.
noted.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Ms. Michelle.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought I was already unmuted. I would like to tag on to what Ms. Wheeler said earlier. I know there's an ongoing effort to reduce road projects. I'll tell you, if congestion produces air quality problems now, I would submit to you that gridlock will produce even greater amounts of air quality problems in the future. I have sat through, when I went to work, I sat down in my car through Route 28 and crawled along. I can't tell you the amount of air pollution that's being generated because people simply cannot drive. It's gridlock. Some days it is absolute gridlock. We need roads. And I know I've said this before, I'll say it again. The outer ring localities have different needs, different objectives, different issues than the inner ring localities. So I would ask you to please consider that. And in addition to the concept of road building, I also see that we're never going to stop building roads because people are never going to stop wanting to own vehicles. Vehicles will not operate forever on petroleum products. as new energy sources become available, those vehicles will be powered by the new energy sources, whether it's electric, whether they're fusion powered, new sources will be developed. So I would ask everyone to please consider that.
Mr. Shell, would you care for any of the agencies in Virginia to respond regarding the benefits of their projects? We have folks from William County and VDOT on the line. As well as
Could Ms. Sinner please comment on my comments?
Yes, Ms. Richelle, and to your first comment about congestion and cars idling, yes, there is enough data to indicate, and I'm sure Mr. Kanti Sherpati can also chime in, enough data that produces pollution in the air, you know, and there is that sweet spot of having the traffic moving in order not to produce as much emissions. In regards to the merits of having roadway projects, especially nowadays, most of the projects are multimodal, you know, and the large projects are, you know, have various strategies to also try to reduce the VMT, such as travel demand management or transportation management plans. You know, they look at the proximity to transit stations and which have you. Also, the other verbs comment. It is housing is expensive, you know, around transit stations, and the working force does rely on other modes of transportation in addition to transit as well as a roadway. So basically, there is an economical development portion of that. I'm stepping a little bit out of my lane here, but definitely there is a need to bring the workforce into, you know, whatever is needed. And by all means, we do an analysis per project when we enter into the NEPA or environmental reviews. I think we're talking about something a little different right now. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sinner.
Thank you very much. Mr. Letourneau.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I feel compelled a little bit to chime in on this one, since the particular project in question is one that I originated in my role on the Loudoun Board of Supervisors and have been working on for the last several years. But I want to make a couple just macro things, which is I want to make sure that we level set, particularly given the first comment that was made on one of the district's projects, what the level of expectation and capability is for local governments to do the type of analysis that some have described, which I do not believe is required as part of a submission. It is impossible to do enhanced level of air quality analysis on projects that are still early in the design phase. This is a long-term body with a long-term plan. And so, for instance, the project in question in Route 50 is something that we are still working on alignments with the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, with our partners in Fairfax County and otherwise, and actual road design. And that's very common for road projects. It takes decades to get to the point, a lot of times, when you're actually able to construct something. So high level, we can give some analysis on the fact that a project like this will contribute significantly to congestion relief. And in fact, we do in fact have data that shows, you know, that the corridor of Route 50 in question here is a failing level of service going out for the next decades without this project. And we can show how it really unlocks the whole area. But I don't know exactly what the expectation is for detailed analysis on air quality, simply because it would be impossible for any local government to undertake that at this stage in the process. And that, you know, those considerations come later with NEPA and other sorts of things. So I just want to make sure that we are kind of on the same page on that. Speaking specifically to this project, we are blessed, but also sometimes when it comes to mobility, cursed in Loudoun and in Western Fairfax by having Dulles International Airport here. So this project is south of Dulles Airport, and it's essentially a bypass of Route 50 between Loudoun and Fairfax counties, leading to Route 28. And it plays very much into what Mayor Rochelle just said in terms of Route 28. The congestion on 28 backs onto 50 and goes miles into Loudoun County. This is an undeveloped, a lot of the area is undeveloped here, but developing rapidly with by-right housing. Now, I will put the record of Loudoun up against anybody when it comes to investing in transit. Hundreds of millions of dollars to construct the Silver Line, extensive land use planning, to build activity centers and build multimodal projects around those stations, bike lanes. We literally started our own local bus service to feed transit. But we still do need roads because we have areas that are greenfield that are being built, and they have limited capacity today, sometimes even dirt roads serving them. And so we balance that, and our citizens are very aware of those environmental issues, but certainly forcing people into highly congested areas when they can't even get to a metro station and our buses can't even get to metro stations is not in anybody's benefit. So this particular project really unlocks this southern section of Loudoun and Western Fairfax in a way that would allow mobility in cooperation with the airport and potentially serve the airport's needs. The airport has significant cargo demands and otherwise, and it's looking at development well into the future, and getting people there is going to be important, regardless of what mode they're using. So it is a very good project. I've been doing road sort of projects for a long time and looking at these things, and I've never seen an analysis that came back the way that our analysis did from Kimley Horn, showing the level of congestion relief that comes from this. So it is very worthy of consideration by TPB. But of course, as a Metro board member, I'm also passionate about transit and understanding the need to invest and take those things into consideration. I would just make the same point that my colleagues have, which is that for the other jurisdictions that are developing rapidly, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. My wife cannot put all 4 of my kids onto a bike to go down to take them to dance class tomorrow. We're going to have to use a road to get there. And I know it's hard sometimes to envision this, but we literally don't have them in some places in our jurisdiction. And I know the same is true in Prince William and elsewhere. So I appreciate that, the consideration for this, and look forward to, I can get as detailed as you want to on this particular project because it's been my baby for a long time, but I look forward to any other questions that may arise.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. We'll turn to the District of Columbia board members for questions, then Virginia. Then after a few minutes, we'll move on to Maryland projects. I believe, Mr. Kanan, did you have your hand up or was that left over from the previous discussion?
No, I still have my hand up. I want to make sure that I'm going in the order of operations. I think you're going to other jurisdictions before coming to the agencies, but happy to.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. I think actually we're all in fairly violent agreement on the principles of what we're trying to do. My question, and I'll frame this again, the litmus test I'm holding this entire process up to is a completeness test. I am expressly not going to engage in sort of value judgments or speculation about benefits and costs. So what I'm looking for is to make sure that the submissions that have come in satisfy the requirements for their submission. So in this case, I think that for my friends and for the project sponsor, just highlight that the form that was submitted claimed that the project would promote non-single occupancy vehicle travel, but it's unclear in the explanatory piece how that's, what the claim is. And just to be clear, I don't think anyone is looking for a 400-page travel demand report on a small project, but please provide the additional explanatory. The other thing which is interesting about this, at least the submission, is that the box is checked for reducing automotive travel in VMT. And I believe question 40 in the submission simply asks the proposer to describe how the project will achieve. If you've checked yes, you have to say, okay, the project is supposed to do X, Y, Z. Tell me more. That was blank. Or at least the information wasn't transmitted to us. So again, in my completeness check hat, I want to make sure that I am being presented with a complete submission and that the project sponsor has an opportunity, Mr. Letourneau, not to produce NEPA level documentation, but simply provide what the proposer's background information, analysis, and or rationale is for claiming yes or no in various categories. So,
thank you, Mr. Kanan. Are you looking for a response now or in a follow-up?
No, for all of these claims, I'm just highlighting where it is the information is incomplete and alerting that at least it's my responsibility to make sure that if I vote on something that the information given to me is complete before moving into the next phase.
Thank you. Let's move on to Mr. Allen. Thank you very much, Mr. Kanan.
Thanks. One quick comment, and then I do have a question. And I think as we look at all of this, I do think it's important that we keep in mind, and I, in particular, I'm trying to make sure I am respecting what I'm hearing from my colleagues around the fact that it's not, I don't think we're saying that if a project does not reduce VMT or greenhouse gas emissions, that therefore it's dispositive, right? There are going to be instances where a project that does increase VMT and greenhouse gas emissions may also be necessary. And I think that's, when we talk to my colleagues talking about the need in some places for roads, I think that's kind of what I certainly am trying to hear and get at as well. I do think, though, when I have my board hat on, though, I also have to recognize that we do have a duty and responsibility, as I think some people are talking about, is that to be able to be asked to vote on something, we have to have the information in front of us. And there are some concerns around where there's not enough information. In some places, I'll say, I read some of this as saying that we're going to reduce VMT on a project, but we're just going to kind of ignore that there would be any induced demand, which I don't think best practices really lay out for us. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that and then be able to say that in what ways have we analyzed and helped make that from an informed decision standpoint. When I look at one of the projects, for example, on Route 50, one of the questions I did have from the proposal was this, and that was the only alternative that seemed to be talked about was in terms of increasing capacity was traffic operational improvements, but I never really got a sense of what that means. What would the operational improvements could be? In what ways would that have any impact on emissions? So maybe that's a question to VDOT is, could you help better explain what was meant by saying what the alternative of traffic operational improvements was, and in what ways would that have an impact on VMT or greenhouse gas emissions?
Thank you. Why don't we turn to Maria and then possibly to the Loudoun County staff?
Thank you. As far as the analysis, again, I would like to defer to Kanti. Kanti, if you can take a minute or so, how will you report the overall CLRP analysis, or actually the air quality conformity analysis in regards to greenhouse gases and VMT? I do not think we are equipped nor have the ability to do the type of analysis that might be needed at this stage. Once we start a project and we are already in the preliminary design or planning area where we have the resources, we do a more in-depth NEPA analysis or SERP or whatever, state mandate reviews. I will check, however, like I indicated with our long range plan, Virginia VTrans, to see if there is, an analysis system-wide that way. But my understanding is that the CLRP process has some components of that, as far as the reporting. So, Kanti, would you mind touching on that a little bit? How the system-wide reporting would be?
Sure. The system-wide reporting, once the analysis is complete, we will be able to report what is happening on the ozone, what is happening with greenhouse gases, not just for any one given year, but there are a number of years that we'll be able to project, which will reflect the combined impact of all of the improvements that have been proposed and included in the analysis. So that information will be available as part of our analysis. It is something that the TPB has been receiving in all of its previous updates. But I would like to go back to, and I'm glad that Sham clarified, I think Sham's point, and this is probably where Mr. Allen was coming from as well, when in this particular example, when the response to a question is, we considered other travel demand management type of strategies, what exactly those are. So it's really more of the completeness of the answer. If it is not a quantitative analysis that is available, at least an explanation of this is our rationale. I think Megan talked about this earlier, that, hey, in Seattle, when they have implemented mile-long or miles-long bus-only lanes, they have some empirical data that ridership goes up by 10%, speeds improve by 10%. So I think that is our rationale, that if we did something here in the district, we could expect something similar if you don't have quantitative analysis.
Thank you, Kanti, and thank you for the clarification. Just one more point to add to the network analysis is that there are so many other efforts and policies that at least Virginia does that helps counter effect of any one potential project, highway project, transit project, such as the TDM program, such as, the transit, more park and rides, and many other strategies that we do, even changing some of the light bulbs that we have, along the highway that help mitigate. So I'll be happy to provide some of that information to this group. So it goes beyond the just highway or some of the discussions that we're having. We would like to continue to look at everything as a network, because all the interconnections of the tissue is what provides the region benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know that we couldn't schedule 4 hours of your time this morning, although we could have that much discussion. So if there are any additional questions for projects in Virginia, I ask you to submit them to me.
Bob Brown has been waiting for a while, Stacy.
Stacy, none of that actually answered my question at all, but we've got 15 minutes left, and we haven't even touched Maryland yet. So I'm frustrated here that the timing is such that we're not able to get to these projects, but we can't not get to Maryland as well. So hopefully I get answers to my questions later, but I'm happy to move on so we can try to get to Maryland.
Yes, we'll work with our agencies to develop responses to all of the questions that you've had, as well as any additional ones that you submit to us.
Stacy?
Yes.
I think I really appreciate all the comments that are going in. I think as the person who had to fill out these forms for all of the projects in Loudoun County, I'd like to speak for all the other people who had to fill out these forms, and that do not, we fill out the form that's presented in front of us. Sometimes it's you're asking good questions and you're asking like, I need more information, but the form is the form, and we give the information as best as possible. Like, we don't submit studies with this. We're not required to do that. So I'm feeling like we're being criticized for something that wasn't responsibility of the applicants to do. We give you our best judgment, and we're happy to answer your questions about them. But we have, as Supervisor Letourneau said, we have loads of reports and other things. But if it's not required, and I think this runs true to many other of the questions that are going to come up, is that we give the information, we're transparent, we give the as best as we know. Some cases, as Supervisor Letourneau said, we're in the midst of a study or haven't just started the study. So, please be fit. Please, until you look at the form itself and try to sit down and fill out the form. You really can't ask these other questions. You can ask the questions, but you have to understand the response to them is based on what we were asked to submit. And if we were asked to submit more information, we submitted more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And it is true that we do ask qualitative questions on those forms. Leo, would you please pull up the slide for the Maryland projects? There are two projects that have been in the plan that have been significantly updated for the TRP, the 270 and the 495 project. And I'll briefly highlight those changes and we'll move on to discussion immediately. The 270 project, the change is to have managed, I'll just hit the new description and then you can read the rest. The project will add one high occupancy toll managed lane in each direction along I-270 between the Capitol Beltway and I-70 US 40, while converting the existing HOV lane in each direction to a hot lane. And next slide, please. And then for the 495 component, it will add two high occupancy toll lanes managed in each direction along the Capitol Beltway between the Virginia end and American Legion Bridge to the Maryland end of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. And the most critical important thing is that these are changing from express toll lays to high occupancy toll lays in each direction, which means that carpools with 3 or more ride free as well as transit. I will open this up to comments or questions for the members of Maryland that are members of our board. Acknowledging Ms. Kostick. and then Mr. Collins.
Thank you. Sorry, I've got to double unmute here. Thank you all for the robust discussion this morning. I want to build on what a number of other board members have said this morning with regard to just the lack of additional information and ability to kind of evaluate some of the projects based on their impact on vehicle miles traveled and on greenhouse gas emissions. I know the forms are a beast to get through. I'm sure it is a really big hassle to fill them all out. But I do think I was concerned as I looked through them, and not singling out MDOT or VDOT or anyone else, but there were a number of answers that were not filled out, particularly to the greenhouse gas emissions impact on number 40B and on question 44 with regard to aspirational and regional goals. And to me, those are the types of questions that would help us get at how these projects fit into the bigger regional goals that we have and the reduction in VMT and reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that we're trying to get to. I have a number of questions also about how induced demand is handled in the analysis of these projects, as well as the greenhouse gas emissions and whether the impact of expanding a highway, let's say, and the potential for induced congestion and increased congestion on arterial roads that maybe feed into that highway or off of that highway, if those are taken into consideration as the highway projects are looked at and the greenhouse gas emissions are looked at. Also just, kind of big picture, looking at the measures that we are taking into consideration here, I wonder if they're really getting at what we want them to get at, because on some of those charts, I see that highway expansion projects check the box for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving bus travel and safety in the same way that a transit project, like a bus lane, does. And I understand that they may be increasing those things to an extent, but it doesn't seem comparable necessarily to something that is focused entirely on bus travel, for example. And so I feel like there's more that needs to be done in terms of considering those things. I also just, with regard to the greenhouse gas emissions and the highway expansion, I know we're moving towards electric vehicles, and that's important. And I know people have raised the concern that we may still need to expand highways and build highways, and that is certainly the case. But I see in our bold aspirational initiatives really a movement towards doing other things. And I'd really love for our constrained portion of this to reflect that more, because I think we have a bold vision, and I think there's more that needs to be done in the constrained portion to meet that, and to meet not just the greenhouse gas emissions goals in the BMT, but also the sustainability goals beyond that in terms of stormwater and environmental impact, safety, equity, all of those things. And so I guess specifically, my questions, and I'm sure this will be something that will need to be answered in the future, but my questions for MDOT specifically is on the vehicle miles traveled and the greenhouse gas emissions and the assumptions that went into those calculations. As well as I noticed there was a reference to a CMP document form that would be required, and I wondered where that would be and at what point we would see that document. So thank you very much. I think I see a need for us to get some more of this information as we continue to consider this.
Thank you, Ms. Kostick. We'll turn to Mr. Earl Lewis. If you would be willing to respond to how the TRP addresses the policy priorities and with the focus on the question regarding VMT and GHG.
All right. Well, thank you, Stacy, and thank you, Casey. I know we met in person. We got a chance to sit next to each other quite a bit and had some interesting discussions, and hopefully one day we'll be able to do that again soon. So as many of you know, the Transportation Planning Board has been looking at the issue of how we aggressively address regional climate change mitigation goals in the transportation sector. Going way back to the what would it take TPB scenario study from May of 2010, we identified that there was a great importance in improving the operational efficiency of our transportation network, which basically meant addressing congestion, as well as increasing transit use and reducing single occupancy vehicles on our roadways. When you look at that, all of the parts of our transportation network work together in synergy to allow us to meet both our transportation goals and our climate change related goals. The hot lanes with free transit use is about managing the continued growth in our region, because we're still expecting another 1.3 million people and 1 million jobs in the NCR in the next 20 to 25 years, okay? Reducing congestion, reducing emissions, and not excluding lower income communities from all the travel choices they need in order to work, live, and support their families. Again, the role of hot lanes is to give the ability to incentivize carpooling and transit options, while also addressing other important needs that also include climate change. I've served on Maryland Climate Change Commission for the last 5 years, so I'm well aware of all the things we need to do to aggressively reduce emissions and how important addressing climate change is. But I also put forward that trying to make decisions on a project by project basis to address climate change is not the right way to go. The traffic relief plan will help us do that. I would also say that if we're going to be incentivizing, which we are, more people to buy ZEVs and hybrids, they'll be looking at us with a skewed eye if they're sitting in their ZEV, whether it be a bus, whether it be a ride share vehicle, whether it be a delivery truck, like Amazon is buying a lot of EV trucks, and they're sitting stuck in traffic because we didn't think congestion was still an important issue. While we're addressing climate change, there's going to be a lot of questions to answer, especially given the focus that we've put on congestion over the last 10 years. And I've been affiliated with COG for 15 years. And right now we have the second worst congestion in the country, which obviously has been impacted positively, at least for the short term, by the pandemic. But we will certainly have the worst congestion in the country if we don't address the transportation system improvements in a dynamic way. It's not a choice between transit and roads. The whole system works as a network, and this project is part of making that network work better with all the other pieces. The Maryland Department of Transportation is investing billions of dollars in transit in the NCR due to additional funding we're giving to WMATA, building the Purple Line, keeping the CCT in Visualize 2045. So we very much believe in transit. There are going to be significant transit improvements as part of the traffic relief plan that will take vehicles off the road by giving people the right incentives, by giving them travel time reliability so they can have better quality of life. So we need to address both quality of life issues as well as climate change as we move forward to win people over to what we need them to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's a discussion that we've had in Maryland for many years. And I know we're going to continue to have that discussion here at the Transportation Planning Board. But I would just ask people to have open minds about how they look at the transportation system as a network, not as these individual pieces, which is this or that. And obviously, travel demand management continues to be an important goal to grow the number of people that are teleworking, the number of people who we give incentives to use transit. But that doesn't mean that all of a sudden people driving vehicles, including trucks, are going to disappear. They're going to continue to be out there, and the transportation network has to address it.
Thank you very much for your response, Mr. Lewis. I believe Mr. Collins from Charles County had a comment or question. And then Ms. Newton from Rockville. Did you still have a question, Mr. Collins?
It was a comment a while ago, so I know we're trying to move forward, so I you know.
Shall we move to Ms. Newton of Rockville then? Thank you, sir.
Sure, and thank you very much, Stacy, and I'll be brief as well. Mr. Chairman, I just want to associate myself with the comments of Casey. The city of Rockville has unanimously voted against this project, even with the modifications. We ask you to do the same. The county council is joining us, and we'll be sending a letter shortly regarding that. I can forward our letter to the comptroller to you all. What these modifications do is, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to cram everything into one little thing because I am conscious of the time. is to put an additional burden on the city of Rockville. We own 3 bridges over 270. By having these hot lanes, that's 3 people, not 2, that will have to come together and agree to leave at a certain time in the morning or evening and return at a certain time. Tolls will be $2 a mile during rush hour, 77 cents per mile in off-peak. I have heard, I've not seen it, but I've heard that it will be $7 a mile for trucks. This project takes away one of our free lanes. It puts you, once you're on the managed lanes, if you want to exit the managed lanes for whatever reason, an accident, whatever, you have to go through Rockville's local streets before you can get back on the managed lanes. It does not respond to COG's goals of air quality analysis, greenhouse gas, social justice, the inequity of making you only have one free lane from 370 South. And it really doesn't address the prime problem, which is from Clarksburg 370 north to 70. There's no transit in this option, which is something we've all been asking for. So to Mr. Lewis's comments that you need all modes of transit, I completely agree with that. The problem is there is no transit north of the Shady Grove Metro Station. The CCT is coming online perhaps in the next 5 years. That will only go internally up to 355. That does not address the people who need to come from Frederick and north south. There are lots and lots of concerns that we have with this, and we ask for further analysis in all regards. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Newton.
I think
I know
Sean
that Kyle
could address the transit issue. The transit question that was brought up by the mayor, I think Sean can help address that.
Briefly, we have a meeting starting shortly.
I'll be very brief, and thank you very much, Mayor Newton, for your comments. And it's certainly some comments that we've heard, and the Secretary Slater has mentioned that several calls that you've had and expressed those concerns to our office as well. In terms of the transit discussion, certainly we are working with all stakeholders, including Frederick County, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County. Our transit work report, which was started in May of 2019 and re-released May of last year, does include what our analysis of I-270 could potentially look like with commuter bus service, connecting Frederick all the way to Tysons, Virginia. Those are ongoing discussions that we're currently having with representatives from Frederick and Montgomery DOTs. As part of this project, if it does move forward with the build alternative, we would dedicate a portion of those toll revenues to transit service improvements. Those will be finalized in the P3 section agreement. That'll be that's currently scheduled for 2022, but certainly happy to address any specific comments after this meeting, specifically with Rockville, City of Rockville.
Thanks, Sean. And if I may, just 1 second, please, to respond to that. My understanding is that the new proposal reduces the amount of money towards transit to 10%. And please just remember, there are 2 lanes from 370 to 70, 2 lanes from 70 to 370, 2 lanes. So the bottleneck that will be created and exists currently is at that merge point of 7 lanes to 2 lanes, 2 lanes to 7 lanes. It's like a ketchup bottle. It gets stuck in the neck.
Well, I understand that we're out of time. We would appreciate your feedback on how we as staff can do better in facilitating these sessions in the future. So certainly welcome your comments directly to me, to Mr. Sakant. Formal comments can also be made through TPB. One moment. Formal comments can be made through TPB. You may submit additional questions through me and we'll get those answered, and we'll work on all of these. We will be documenting this as part of our official comment summary.
Okay.
And so just wanted to make sure you heard all of that. There's a lot of opportunities yet for follow-up. Someone has an additional question before I turn it back to Mr. Sakant.
Super quick. I just want to make sure that I spread the love evenly across the jurisdictions. Similarly to my colleagues in the district in Virginia, I believe that in the submission, this is my completeness test, for the 495 and 270 hot lanes, the box for reducing GHG is checked, but there's no explanation given for that. And then similarly on the Buckystown Pike, Maryland 85, it's indicated that it will reduce automotive travel and VMT, but single occupancy vehicles are also indicated as the only mode. So there could be either a clerical or an accuracy question there. Closing thought, just remember everyone that the reason why we do this is because of enabling legislation at the federal level that is grounded in the Clean Air Act. That's what actually starts the MPO responsibility for these long-range transportation projects. So I've got an eye towards it. No modal wars, no jurisdictional wars. I'm looking for completeness and some level of justification given as the forms describe so that we can consider these fairly. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank all our members of the board and technical experts for being here today. I'll turn it back to Conti Sakant to begin our board meeting.
Before we do that, Stacy,
on the call, I do ask them to log off. Yes, sir.
Before we do that, Stacy, one first housekeeping question for Conti. To switch into TPB, do we need to log off and log back on, or can everybody stay exactly where they are? Okay. All right. So how about this? In just a second, let's take a 2-minute break so people can stretch their legs, run to the bathroom, put that coffee in the microwave, whatever you got to do. So we'll take a quick 2-minute break before we start TPB. To Stacy, I think there were some projects that we didn't even get to in this work session, however. In particular, I think for our colleagues in Maryland, we didn't even get to a couple of things. I'll be honest, I think this was actually a very, even though maybe it felt heated at times, I think it was a really good discussion. And I think that in the interest of us doing our work, I think it's worth us considering finding time. And I know it's hard to get everybody's schedule to do an additional work session because one, I think we need to be fair to our Maryland colleagues that we've got to get through all the Maryland projects and give time for that. But two, it feels like this is a serious conversation that we need to keep working towards. So Stacey, we can follow up offline.
Happy to do so.
With Conti and Lynn to see if we can't find time for that. But unless I see a lot of heads nodding, so I think that no one's yelling at me. So I think that would make sense for us to find a time to do an additional work session to have time to dig in and also to make sure we give due time for our Maryland colleagues.
Excellent. All the people, sir.
All right, so everyone, we're going to take a 2-minute break. And then we're going to reconvene here. So what is it? 12:03, so maybe 12:05. We'll start our TPB. So stretch your legs, turn your cameras off for a second. We'll be right back.
And we do ask that those that are not members of the board, if they want to continue to listen to the board meeting, to go to the TPB event page that I shared with you, but log off the WebEx. Thank you.
Conti and Lynn, what do you think? Should we get started?
Sir, it's 12:05.
All right, there we go. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charles Allen, Chair of the Transportation Planning Board. Let me now call TPB's April 21st, 2021 meeting to order. For those of you that were with us just a moment ago, we had a very robust working session for the previous hour and a half. And we went right up until 12 o'clock. So we took just a quick break so folks could stretch their legs before we get started here. So thanks for your patience. As we continue meeting virtually during the pandemic, we continue to live stream our audio and video of the meeting on the internet and on YouTube. Look forward to being able to later this year at some point back in person. While most people here are familiar with our processes for these virtual meetings, for the benefit of those watching online for the first time, let me briefly review the procedures that we follow during each of our virtual meetings. First, I'm going to ask Lynn to take a roll call of members or alternates to document your presence at this meeting and to determine that we've got a quorum. Then, as we move to our agenda items, I'll have each presenter complete their briefing, then invite questions from members in turn by jurisdiction. I usually try to go, depending on the item, one direction, and then I counterclockwise go back the other way so that either DC or Maryland or Virginia is not always going first or last. For action items on the agenda, once the presenter is completed, I'll invite someone to make a motion to adopt the resolution if I don't do it myself, followed by a second of on the motion. We'll also invite questions from members by jurisdiction. At the end of the discussions, we call for a vote by jurisdiction, and we ask only for nays and abstentions at that point. The rest of the votes from those present will be assumed as a yes vote. And lastly, as a friendly reminder, please mute your microphones as always, and make sure that you unmute your mic and state your name and jurisdiction when you do speak. And so, Lynn, to you now to take the roll call and make sure that we've got a quorum.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome everyone to sort of round two. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to state the name of your agency or jurisdiction, and if you could state your name, I'd appreciate that. If I miss you, I'll be monitoring the participant chat, and you can also, the participant list, and also the chat. All right, so here we go. District Department of Transportation. Maybe they're just not back yet. District Office of Planning.
Kristen Calkins here for Director Trueblood.
Thank you. City Council, Ms. Pinto.
I'm here.
Great, thanks, saw you. District City Council, Mr. Allen. Gotcha.
I'm here.
District City Council, Christina Henderson.
I'm here.
Thank you. Moving on to Maryland, Maryland Department of Transportation.
Earl Lewis here.
Thank you. City of Bowie. Charles County.
Reuben Collins here.
Thanks. City of College Park.
Patrick Wyan here.
Hello.
Denise Mitchell here.
Thank you. Frederick County. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell here.
Thanks. City of Gaithersburg.
Dennis Senslinger is here, and I believe Neil's here.
I saw him too. He was on the phone a little bit, but I'll keep an eye out. Thanks. City of Greenbelt.
Hey, good afternoon. Emmett Jordan here.
Thanks. City of Laurel. Montgomery County Executive. I did see Gary. I'll keep an eye out. Montgomery County Legislative. Prince George's County Executive.
Terry Bellamy here.
Thanks.
And also, and Vic Weisberg, alternate.
Thanks, Vic. Prince George's County Legislative. City of Rockville.
Bridget Donald Newton's here, and Evan Glass is coming. He's tied up in a hearing.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that update. City of Tacoma Park.
Casey Kostick is here.
Thanks. And I want to give a shout out to your coworker. I could use a hug too. Anyway, Maryland Senate, we have vacancies. And then, so Maryland House of Delegates.
Mark Corman.
Thanks. Moving on to Virginia, Virginia Department of Transportation.
Maria Cedar is here.
City of Alexandria.
Yannick.
Thanks. Arlington County.
Christian Dorsey is here.
Thanks. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County Legislative.
Walter Alcorn here.
Thank you. Anyone else from Fairfax County? Great, gotcha, thank you. City of Falls Church.
Dave Snyder here.
Thanks. Fauquier County. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstattd here.
And Matt Letourneau here.
Thanks. City of Manassas.
Pam Sebesky here.
Thanks. City of Manassas Park.
Jeanette Rischel here.
Thanks. Prince William County.
Ann Wheeler here.
Vic Angry here.
Gotcha. And we still have vacancies for Virginia House and for the Virginia Senate. So we'll move on to WMATA. Sean still here? I'll keep an eye out. Federal Highway Administration.
Sandra Jackson's here.
Great, thanks, Sandra. Federal Transit Administration.
Dan Koenig, FTA.
Thanks, Dan. National Capital Planning Commission. Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority. And National Park Service. That completes the roll call, Chair Allen. We have a quorum.
Hi, this is Neil Harris from Gaithersburg. I'm here too. My program was locked up.
Great, thanks, Neil.
Hey, Lynn, this is Sean from Metro. I had to step out for a second, but I'm here.
Gotcha, thanks.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Lynn. Let me turn actually to you next, Lynn. Are there any comments from the public that you can help summarize for us before we turn to the next agenda item?
Great, yes. So there were actually no public comments received regarding our specific April TPB meeting agenda items. However, as you all know at this time, there is a public comment period open through May 3rd. And I did post a memo that provides a summary of all 116 comments and their contributors that have been submitted to date. So all of the comments we've received will be captured and shared next month when all of the comments together will be presented to the TPB. So feel free to take a sneak peek look at our comments received to date, posted on our meeting page under item 1. Thank you.
Are you sure you don't want to read all 100?
It's pages and pages. We included all the names, so at least you guys can go check all that out. But thank you, Charles.
All right, thank you, Lynn. Appreciate it. All right, let me move to agenda item number 2, which is approval of the March 17th, 2021 meeting minutes. As always, we start with a review and adopting the minutes of our March 17th meeting. Before I ask for any comments or changes, let me make a motion to adopt the updated minutes for our February 17th meeting. Sorry, of our March 17th meeting. And is there a second, please?
Second.
And just for the record, can we make sure we say who it was making the second?
Second, Pam Sebesky, Manassas.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you, Pam. Okay, were there any comments or changes to the draft of the meeting minutes that were circulated? All right, then hearing none, let me move to a vote, and here's how we do it. I'll do the jurisdiction, and again, remember you're only voting nay or abstention. Your silence means a yes. So District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, WMATA and other federal agencies. All right, thank you. I deem that a unanimous in support. Do you agree, Conti and Lynn? Excellent. All right, let's move to item number 3 on our agenda, our technical committee report. We have a written summary of our technical committee's April 2nd meeting. Technical committee chair Jason Groth. Let me turn to you for your review.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, well, I apologize. I'm in an awkward environment because I had the opportunity to get my second COVID shot today, so I'm in transit. But the technical committee met on April 2nd and had a great discussion as always. And just a couple of quick highlights. You do have the full summary in your packet, but I wanted to point out a few items. Of course, we heard the details of this year's planned Bike to Work Day scheduled for May 21st, and I believe we'll hear more about that shortly. We had a briefing on this round of TLC awards. Again, another one we'll hear soon. And another item that's on today's agenda, but there was some discussion on, was a briefing on the technical inputs of the air quality conformity analysis for the 2022 updates of the Visualize 2045 plan. One of the interesting questions was, how does the model treat telework? And the response from staff was that the current model actually doesn't take telework very well in terms of processing, but the next version, so they mitigate as best they can, but the next version of the software is anticipated to incorporate that better. Another quick note from that agenda item was that the conformity analysis will also allow the TPB to discern which projects are not in keeping with the goals of the long range plan. And I guess that kind of goes in a little bit in discussion, or becomes a discussion as such as the items in the last work session. So nonetheless, another item also on today's agenda that had a good discussion was the briefing on the climate change mitigation study of 2021, the 2021 work plan. With the consultant ICF. I found that fascinating, as well as a lot of the members did. So very thorough and interesting. And then finally, we had a briefing on the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Partnership, which is looking at regional charging station locations, including looking at areas of equity access to promote Uber, Lyft, and bus access for all folks. And of course, working with electric bus fleets in the DC regional jurisdictions. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Jason. We'll see if there are any questions. Let me start with WMATA and federal agencies. Virginia, Maryland, and DC. All right, not hearing any. Jason, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, next we'll move to item 4 on the agenda, our Community Advisory Committee and access for all committee reports. So we first have our Community Advisory Committee Chair, Elisa Walton, who will highlight a few topics for us. Just as a reminder, you do have a full written report of their April 15th meeting that was circulated in advance. So let me turn to you.
Great. Thank you, Chair Allen, and good afternoon, everyone. As Chair Allen mentioned, we met last Thursday virtually for our regular CAC meeting. We received updates on Visualize 2045 and the public comment period that's underway. And staff also briefed the CAC on 3 TPB technical assistance programs and this upcoming TPB agenda. The bulk of the meeting was really focused on Visualize 2045, the overview of the plan and the public comment. TPB Transportation Planner Stacy Cook briefed us on that, including background information, the federal requirements, and regional policies that the plan is based on. She highlighted 2 main parts of the plan, the constrained element, including the subset of regional projects that must be included in the federal air quality conformity analysis, and then the rest of the plan, including the goals and challenges. She reviewed themes that staff are exploring, including equity and how to plan for uncertainty, and then also talked about the public outreach that will be coming up. Community engagement specialist Karen Admendadis reviewed the public comment period as well and talked about where the materials could be found and how to comment. CAC members had a lot of interest and feedback on this, in particular in the areas of equity and climate change, which came up a number of times. Committee members noted that equity should be included throughout the plan and really substantially and not as a separate topic area. Ms. Cook assured us that staff have been discussing how to incorporate equity into every aspect of the plan, and so that will be a big focus. And then on the topic of climate change, CAC members asked about how the plan will address climate, both in the plan as a whole, but also specifically in the constrained element. Some questions focused around emerging technologies and, for instance, how a rise in electric vehicle use can reduce climate change, but potentially make congestion worse. So, you know, some of the trade-offs that might be necessary. Other questions focused on the conformity projects currently out for public comment, asking how the region will meet its climate goals if the projects in the plan have not changed much from the 2018 plan. Other members asked how the projects will help reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita. Mrs. Cook explained some of the challenges in developing transportation projects in the face of the constraints that are faced, including land use, transportation demand, funding, and competing needs. But that with these constraints in mind, the region is committed to working to address critical concerns such as the ones that were raised. She also explained that the air quality conformity analysis is for the purpose of demonstrating compliance and must be based on defensible assumptions and validated data. She also explained that the transportation projects, of course, take time, and the projects in the plan come from approved projects at the state and local level, and so they can't always pivot quickly. We had a briefing on the 3 technical assistance programs from Transportation Planner John Swanson, the Transportation Land Use Connections Program, the Regional Safety Program, and Transit Within Reach Program. And then we reviewed the recommended transportation land use connections projects that will be up for approval at this TPB meeting. In general, there was interest in these programs and how they further regional priorities, as well as some specific questions about certain projects. One committee member expressed concern that these programs may be focused too exclusively on high capacity transit station areas. And he noted that some activity centers, particularly in the outer jurisdictions, don't have high capacity transit. Mr. Swanson explained that TLC has sought to be flexible in the past and going forward, and that sometimes can address other priorities. For example, one project recommended for FY 2022 focuses on a high frequency bus center, which isn't technically high capacity transit, but it was designated a transit access focus area last year. Another question that came up again here was how equity concerns are incorporated into the selection of projects for these programs. And Mr. Swanson addressed that. This is addressed in 2 ways, both the equity emphasis areas, and staff also discussed how potential projects would serve disadvantaged populations, whether or not they're part of the equity emphasis areas. And then finally, we heard about the April TPB agenda from Lynn Erickson. So it was a packed meeting, a lot of discussion again around those 2 areas in particular, equity and climate change, and a rich discussion in the time that we had for that. So that's it for me, unless there's any questions, and back to you, Chair Allen.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Walton. Let's check on questions first. So any questions from DC? From Maryland? From Virginia? And WMATA and agencies. All right, not hearing it. Thank you so much, Ms. Walton. Appreciate that update. Next, let me turn to our colleague, Mr. Aguirre, who's the chair of our Access for All Advisory Committee. And again, you've got a written report of the committee's April 9th meeting, but let me turn to you for a quick summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had another robust conversation. Ms. Stacy Cook also provided us an update on the status of the Visualize 2045 update. The discussion following the presentation had some good questions and suggestions. Just a quick overview of some of these, the type of advertising used and how we involve average citizens, the need to consider the non-commuter and weekend users of transportation services. We thought this was very crucial because people are using transportation not just to get to work, but for our everyday needs, right? Also, the need to consider shift workers and their access having impact upon in-home care, nursing homes and family caregivers, and also the fact that people with disabilities have basic essential needs to meet before they can even consider transportation to employment. So it's definitely some good pointers that we were giving back to Ms. Cook. We also had a briefing on Reach a Ride. For anyone not familiar with Reach a Ride, it is a website and call center that provides consumers and social service agencies access to information about specialized transportation services in the region. Mr. Dan Sheehan took our feedback and will be following up with us with some of the issues that were brought up. We also had Mr. Ritako, who briefed us on the enhanced mobility solicitation. And Ms. Winchell-Mendy also provided an overview of the CRISA funding and the timeline for awarding some of this. Of course, some of this is still pending with the concurrence of funding and recommendations and everything coming forward. And the last part of our meeting, we just had some other business, and I wanted to give a quick shout out to Ms. Doris Ray, who shared information on a pending lawsuit. Well, actually, a decision on a lawsuit to move it forward, which was Equal Rights Center versus Uber Technologies. which was looking at the failure to provide equivalent service under ADA Title III to people with disabilities. So I think this was an important case to make sure that this is still being taken into consideration, and we're looking forward to tracking some of this as it moves forward. The last thing I'll mention, as always, everyone is always welcome to join us at our Access for All committee meetings, and the next meeting will be held on Friday, June 11th. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Let's run through if there are any questions. Let's start with WMATA and federal agencies. Any questions from Virginia? Maryland? And DC?
Chair Allen, I just have a really brief comment.
Yep, Casey.
This is Casey from Tacoma Park. Thank you very much for the report. I just noticed the comment you made about the need to consider non-commuter travel and weekend users, and I thought that was really important and just wanted to lift that up a little bit, because I've also seen, particularly with a lot of the surveys that are done on travel behavior, it seems like the focus is frequently on commuting and the assumption that people have a regular commute to the same location at the same time, and doesn't necessarily consider people who may be traveling to different locations for work at different times or different weeks of the month based on the work that they're doing, or non-commuter trips, or transporting family members around, or many of those things. So thank you for raising that.
And this is Earl Lewis from MDOT. I'd like to second Casey's comments there. About 80% of the trips that people take are not commuter trips. So it's really important to focus on those as well to see what we can do to have better outcomes. Thanks.
I will third and fourth those comments as well. Absolutely, very important. All right, thank you very much. Next up, we're going to move to agenda item number 5, steering committee actions and report from the director. So again, you've got a written summary of the April 2nd steering committee meeting and report from our staff director, but let me turn to Conti for a brief summary from him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. You have my written report. I will just be brief and bring a few items to your attention. The steering committee did meet on April 2nd. It took 2 actions. The first was approving a TPB proclamation that May 21st, Friday, would be the Regional Bike to Work Day. It's on page 4. The event was canceled last year, yet this year we have plans to hold it. Of course, with a number of precautionary arrangements in place. We request TPB member jurisdictions to adopt similar proclamations. In the past, staff has requested that members consider doing so. So even though the work sites are not likely to be fully open by May 21st, those working at home are being encouraged to recreate a short version of their commute, if you will, maybe bike to a nearby pit stop. This year, all the pit stops are encouraged not to hold any events for large gathering at the pit stops. Bicyclists will also be provided a check-in time where they can come in, make their trip noted, and pick up the T-shirt, the very important T-shirt, and any other swag that the pit stops may have. So the next action that the steering committee took were a couple of tip amendments, one for projects in Prince William County in Virginia, and the other for projects in the District of Columbia. Details are on pages 5 through 27. So this past month, the chairman issued, on behalf of the board, letters of support to member jurisdictions for federal grant applications. I want to particularly draw attention to this because this is very consistent with some of the priorities that the board has been discussing around climate change, particularly with the electrification of the fleet. There was also one application from Prince William County for an infra grant for a project along I-95, I-123 interchange, which is one of the top congested locations in the region. There was also an application from the district, Department of Transportation, for a federal low or no emissions grant to purchase 14 electric buses, and also importantly, to begin adding solar infrastructure at their district's South Capitol Street transit facility. So in addition to buying vehicles, these kinds of infrastructure needs are beginning to come forward. And Prince George's County also applied for a similar low and no emissions grant to purchase 6 electric buses. And they too have requested funding for installing 4 fast charging stations and a couple of overhead charging units. Next, I draw your attention to a memo from me on page 33 about updating a planning MOU that the TPB has with a neighboring MPO to our south, the Fredericksburg MPO in Virginia. In 2004, the TPB and the Fredericksburg MPO got into this memorandum of understanding, and the brief background on this is MPOs are established for federally defined urbanized area, and the Washington, D.C. urbanized area extends a little bit into Stafford County, but Stafford County previously belonged to Fredericksburg MPO. So rather than leave that MPO and come join this MPO, we executed an MOU where the Fredericksburg MPO will take responsibility for conducting the TPB type of activities for northern portion of Stafford County. Our federal partners had advised us that this 2004 MOU needs to be updated. A lot of changes have happened. So that's what we had been working on for the past 14 months. Now the Fredericksburg MPO board has approved the revised MOU. We have the review and okay from the federal partners as well. So that is in the packet. We will be asking you next month to approve getting into this updated MOU. 2 other brief items, if I may. The inaugural round of TPB's technical assistance grants for roadway safety. So the solicitation has been completed. We received 11 applications for about $700,000. Of course, we have only $250,000 to give in this first round, but this will be an annual round. So we continue to have that kind of funding available. So the selection committee is currently reviewing the applications, and we will bring the recommendations to you in June. Staff is also working on a white paper on resiliency within the transportation sector. We are currently gathering information from TPB member agencies' technical staffs to establish a baseline understanding of what resiliency planning activities are being taken within their jurisdictions, what is the baseline for the region. So we plan to brief the board about that in the coming months as well. So those were the items in the read ahead packet. If I could take just one more minute and draw your attention to a memo that was not in the read ahead packet, but it was posted to the TPB meeting website yesterday. And that is a memo from me to the board. And it provides what I'm calling a point in time summary of the President's American Jobs Plan proposal. As members may know, this plan proposes to provide about $2.3 trillion in a one-time federal funding assistance over an 8-year period, of course, but a significant amount of money totally focused on infrastructure, including transportation infrastructure. Now, it is a President's plan and proposal. The exact way that the Congress will act on it is not yet known. Even the details of the plan is not known because it is not been presented as a bill. But there have been a few documents, there have been some webinars, there have been some articles. So I've been tracking these, and I've tried to put this memo together that hopefully you will find useful. But I would simply note that this situation, this proposal continues to evolve, and things might change between what you read today and next month, but I'll continue to provide that. In table 1 in the memo, you will see the breakdown of the proposed $2.3 trillion investment, of which $571 billion is identified as for transportation. In figure 1, there is a breakdown of this $571 billion for transportation, where that funding could go. And they have also included $50 billion that is for resiliency, but that resiliency is not just for transportation. So yet they list it under transportation. I just want to make that point. And in table 2 is the other question: how will whether it is 570 billion or 621 billion for transportation, How exactly will that money be made available is a question we don't know. But last week, there was some reporting that the US DOT has put out some ideas of how it could be. So we were able to get a look at what US DOT is thinking. And they have identified a set of programs which adds up to $456 billion. So I mentioned all of this because the things continue to evolve and there isn't enough details. But it is important to note that there could be a very significant infusion of federal assistance to the region and to the country in general for transportation infrastructure. So that was a memo that was completed yesterday, and it's available to you on your website. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Christy. I think it's really important information that we're keeping an eye on as well. Let me turn to questions. I'll start with one myself, and that is at our steering committee. One of the things we had talked about was being able to reach out to the U.S. Department of Transportation around delaying submission of the long-range plan. And so I want to ask, has that outreach or request been made, and have we heard a response back from US DOT?
Yes, Mr. Allen, this was regarding we are scheduled to update our long-range plan, Visualize 2045, by 2022. And to keep that schedule, we currently have adopted a schedule where the technical analysis before the plan can be adopted would begin in June. And the question at the steering committee was, can we take some additional time and to begin the process, which would mean we may miss the 2022 deadline by which the plan has to be updated. Can we get a sense from our federal partners? I did follow up. I had a meeting with the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration representatives. I explained the situation to them, and they said that they referred me to a written response they had provided on a similar request made last year by the Association of all the MPOs in the country, which was asking for a whole number of extensions, including an extension for plan update. And that response indicated that US DOT had said they do not have the legislative authority to grant extensions of these timeframes. But I did tell them that we can write to them explaining some of our thinking, that we are trying to develop this update consistent with some of the federal priorities and as well as the updated regional priorities. And they said, you're welcome to write, but this is the past response. So that's where we are.
Okay. If you could share that, I guess, response from last year, and then we can follow up after this to also think about some of our next steps here.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. All right, let me turn to, we'll just go in the order. So let me go to Maryland first, or next.
Mr. Chair.
I see a couple of people, a couple of hands up. I see Neil Harris and I see Earl Lewis. I don't know if there's anybody else. So Neil, let me turn to you and then go to Earl.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Srikanth for the massive amount of time he spent with me on the telephone over the last few weeks to discuss the American Jobs Plan and to create this memo giving us the state of what potentially would be expected. I'd like to make a suggestion to this board that over the next several months, we think seriously about potentially forming a task force, not until it's more concrete, but thinking about what about using this board to endorse some very regionally significant projects, and even potentially to think about projects that aren't currently in the long range plan, but may have an impact on us. Looking at the plan, there's a tremendous amount of funding here potentially for basically everything we talk about, for roads and bridges, for public transit, for rail, for safety improvements and transformative projects relating to things like electrification of the fleet. So it addresses air quality, safety, transportation, I mean, the whole ball of wax. I know we've had many conversations with our elected representatives at the federal level. And I know that every jurisdiction is putting their proposals and wish list together, but I'd love to see us work as a regional body to see what we can do to really transform the region going forward. This is literally a once in a generation, or maybe 2 generations opportunity for us. So hopefully we'll take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Harris. Let me turn to Mr. Lewis, I think.
Yeah, just to sort of second what Neil was talking about. I think it was important to point out that the federal dollars that the Biden administration is allocating for transportation that Conti summarized so well has about 30% of that 571 million allocated for transportation going to the electric vehicle marketplace, and another 50 million or 10% of it going to infrastructure resilience. Both will help with dealing with issues related to climate change and reducing emissions. And I'd just like to say, I know how important the ZEV revolution that we're in the early days are to the region. I attended an EV event in Annapolis on Saturday. And that event, it was in Maryland, but there were folks there from DC and Virginia showing off their EV. So there's lots of passion for that across the whole region. So thanks.
Thanks so much. We can certainly follow up with that idea, and Conti, we can talk perhaps after the meetings too, because we've talked in the first couple of months of this year, we've talked about how important this opportunity is, and trying to think about what is the right fit for us to help, be able to think through our projects, both individually but regionally. So I appreciate both the comments there. Ms. Newton, I see your hand up digitally, but I'm not sure if that's from earlier, just hasn't been taken down, or if you wanted to jump in here.
Sorry, it's from the previous meeting. I'll figure out how to take it down.
Got it, no problem. Just didn't want to skip you. Ms. Taveras, I think I saw your hand.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment that our parks and planning are starting a pilot program to completely transform all of their entire fleet to electric vehicles, and I thought that was pretty cool. So just to lower their carbon footprint, and they're being, the stuff that they're doing is really cutting edge in terms of they put up a solar farm and some other things, and I can bring a full report on that, but I just wanted to throw some shade. I don't know.
Shade and solar farms don't go together, so it's got to be just pure sunshine.
But I was pretty proud. I'm gonna brag a little bit. Thank you.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. Any other Maryland before I move to Virginia? All right, Virginia. And WMATA and any other agencies?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Conti, for all of the work that staff does. Regarding the conversations with the DOT, with the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration, thank you for taking that request on and exploring that. Just so I understand, the only written guidance we do have, however, is from the previous administration, but we don't have new written guidance that reflects the current administration's stated priorities and objectives. Is that, am I understanding that correct?
If you're talking about a response to the letter, that is from the previous administration, not from the current.
So,
but the regulations is that hasn't changed for many administrations.
Understand, but one could surmise that there may, well, okay, that's helpful. I'm not going to make any conjectures, but that's helpful. And then this is more of a broader statement about where we go as a body. Certainly we need a yes and all hands on deck approach to addressing our responsibility as a board to meet climate change goals. That's actually the genesis of where the long range plan comes from. It doesn't come from a congestion strategy. It's grounded in the Clean Air Act. But I also want to level set with folks that we do need to move and get the grid electrified, get our vehicles electrified. Best estimates suggest that if we want to meet our emissions targets, we need 90% of our vehicles electrified by 2050. Right now, the market share of electric vehicles is 0.3%. So either we as a body need to re-baseline our expectations of what our actions are going to do, or consider the other tools in our toolkit that have to be part of our actions in addition to electrification. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. And I think for board members, that's related to that request. That's why I'd request, and Conti's going to share the letter from the previous administration, and then we can also look at what our I would like to have the board be able to submit a letter to see the new administration. If there is a legislative legal impediment to what we're asking for, then we can kind of figure out what our next steps are there. But I think that since there is an administration change, it's worth us making sure we make that request to fully vet that as an option, so we know what our full menu looks like. So I appreciate that. All right, I think that was it for questions for Conti. Wait, nope, I see more. Sorry.
Sorry, Maria Sinner with VDOT. Conti, just if you could explain, maybe you don't know the answer, but if an extension is to be granted, does that grant the extension of all the federal actions that we normally have to go through on a day-by-day basis, such as funding authorization, TIP, NEPA actions? Would everything be extended within that extension?
Thanks. The letter that went last year from the Association of National MPOs asked for exemptions or extensions on a number of actions that pertain to state DOTs, such as TIP and STIP and other things. So when I share that letter with you, you will probably see the federal highway position as of last year on extensions to the actions that DOTs typically take. But the question that I raised with them was really focused on the MPO. The TPB has to update its plan by 2022. Before we update the plan, we have to get the conformity approved. Can you give us more time for those two actions? That was all I asked. I did not ask them about the routine project level funding processing with them, but AMPO letter did ask about that. And I'll post that. I'll share that with members this afternoon, right after this meeting.
Thank you. That would be important because the DOTs, as you know, have to have several actions in order to keep up projects, even maintenance projects running. So thank you. Mm-hmm.
Great. And then Casey, I think, did I see your hand go up? And then Earl,
thank you.
After that again.
Yeah, I'm gonna respond to Sean.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Earl. I was calling on Casey and then was saying I'll come to you after that.
I'm fine.
No problem.
No worries. I just wanted to voice that I am interested in exploring the extension, and I think that would be an opportunity for us to look a little more at our climate impacts, and particularly the concurrent study that is being done that we're talking about a little later today. I could see that being a useful opportunity to extend the deadline for when we do update the plan based on that. I was just curious what the specific genesis of the letter that the MPO Association submitted previously was. Was that based on COVID that generated the request, or climate change, or something else?
Yes, around March last year, you will all remember when we had to immediately transition to virtual meetings. Our bylaws did not even allow us to meet virtually. We met under an emergency authorization from our attorneys, and the very first thing we did in that emergency meeting was to amend the bylaws to give us the right. So similar sorts of issues were faced on plan updates, TIP updates, funding updates, holding. Many state agencies did not allow for holding public hearings that are mandated virtually. So they had to enact legislation enabling them to do. So they cited all of these things to say, while we are doing all of these things, we can't meet a deadline. Can you give us an extension? So that was the context.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to more information on that.
Sure.
Thanks. And then Mr. Lewis, and then if there's no one else after that, we're going to try to move on to our next agenda items.
Yeah, so real quick, I know these stats because I've chaired Maryland's Zero Emission Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council for the last 5 years. And Sean is exactly right. The number of ZEVs right now out there in the field are very small, but you also have to look at the growth rate. When I first started my role in early 2016, there was a little bit over 6,000 ZEVs registered in the state of Maryland. And now we have over 31,000, which is over 35% growth rate. So you sort of look at the growth rate, and even if that slows down a little bit, you can get significant growth. And it's really encouraging that the Biden administration is putting the largest category of its transportation funding into the electric vehicle marketplace, which should do a lot to help jumpstart, not just in the NCR in Maryland, Virginia, but nationally, greater acceleration, which based on our models, ZEVs have one of the biggest impacts in lowering emissions. Obviously, more renewable power production will also help a lot on the other side of that, but it will help us reach aggressive climate change goals, being aggressive with ZEVs nationally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. All right, Councilmember Harris, I see you put your hand up, and I just want to, we're technically right now we're in questions for Conti, so I feel like we've gone pretty wide from there, but let's see what you got.
It's real quick. I just want to say that it was our electric vehicle bus that was highlighted yesterday at the announcement for the American Jobs Plan that we just discussed. Another bragging moment, that's all. That's all.
You got it, no problem. All right, I'm going to try to get us back on track unless there's any other questions for Conti, because we do have some agenda items at the end of this that we want to make sure we got time for. All right, Conti, thank you so much. That was one of our more robust questions for Conti section, which should be like a road show at this point, so we love it. All right, I'm going to move to item number 6, the chairman's remarks. For many of us today, and maybe that's why we're getting punchy, we're deep into the 3rd hour of our TPB activities for a lot of us here. Earlier, we had a work session to review the proposed updates to the projects on our long-range transportation plan, Visualize 2045, that would be included in the upcoming air quality conformity analysis. We had a very good discussion, a robust discussion. Sometimes there was a little heat to the discussion, but also included posing questions to the transportation agencies. We also actually had such a good conversation that we ran out of time. And so we're going to be looking to schedule some additional time to make sure we could go through all of our projects. But I do want to note, this is actually something new that the staff is working on and trying. I think it's actually really essential. And so I am grateful for TPB staff for carving out that time to do this because I think it's an important part where we can dig a little deeper than we may otherwise be able to do during our TPB sessions. So thank you to the staff for doing that. And it's important, of course, because we're going to be voting on a draft of the long-range plan right now. It's scheduled to be in June, and both the board and the public need to have the full information about all the projects, especially their impacts on vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, and more. This board has been very clear that we are going to take seriously our role in addressing climate change by thinking carefully about our regional transportation infrastructure. We will have some more time during this meeting today to continue to submit our questions and comments. And again, as I mentioned, we're going to look to have an additional work session. We'll be receiving and reviewing the responses to these questions and to other comments and questions received from the public next month. That's another new thing this time around. We will not be taking any action, just reviewing comments, questions, and responses, and then be able to discuss collectively what our own perspectives are before coming back the following month to act. So I just think it's really important for us all to recognize that we are acting with some intentionality to try to create more opportunities for discussion and feedback, and also listening to the comments that are coming to us. And ultimately, I think that's going to help enhance our board and board actions. So I appreciate that. Next up, now we're going to move to action item number 7, or agenda item number 7, which is our action items. So these are funding recommendations and FY 2019 through 2024 TIP amendment, including some projects. I think, Lynn, am I turning to you for this? This is going to be the first of 2 action items. Lynn's going to first brief us on the projects recommended for funding from the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, CRISA. And if I correctly recall, this funding will help organizations that provide travel assistance to our older adults and people with disabilities who have been adversely impacted by the pandemic. So let me turn to you at this point, Lynn.
Thanks, Chair Allen, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Lynn Winchell-Mendy, and I am the grants manager for the 5310 Enhanced Mobility Program, and this CRISA funding falls under that category. Next slide. So today I'll provide a basic overview of CRISA. I'll share information on the projects that have been recommended for funding. And I'd like to pause here to say thank you to the TPB officers and AFA Chair, Chair Allen, Sebeski Collins, and AFA Chair Aguirre for their time reviewing the recommendations and providing their concurrence. We appreciate it. And so I'll also be presenting an action item for TPB to approve the projects and recommend the amendment of the TIP to include them. And finally, I'll talk about next steps, how to get the funding out on the street. Next slide. So on December 27th, CRISA was signed into law. It included $50 million for the 5310 Enhanced Mobility Program. So I believe I mentioned before to this group, the CARES Act did not include any funding for enhanced mobility. So it was nice to see this additional money, especially since we've shared how the pandemic has impacted the enhanced mobility program and grantees in the region. So for our DC, Maryland, Virginia urbanized area, we received $532,218 based on formula grants, and it's 100% federal, so no match is required. The eligible expenses are the same as those under enhanced mobility, but recipients were directed to prioritize payroll and operational needs. Next slide. So in March, I came before you to present on the eligibility criteria for CRISA. And so the solicitation was open to existing or recently closed recipients of enhanced mobility programs. The reason why we did this is because these agencies are already federally compliant or could quickly be. And I know our chair spoke about the importance of getting the funding out as quickly as possible. So doing this, we felt it was a way to do that while also ensuring that the federal requirements could be met pretty easily by these applicants. So the applicants were required to well, first I should say it's the funding was for the same project as the existing or recently closed award and or for transportation to COVID vaccination sites. So applicants were required to document impact, specifically the need to end or limit services or lay off or furlough staff, and to document any CARES Act money that they received to show that it was fully expended or was not used for the same purpose as the application. Next slide. So the recommendations for funding were based on the selection criteria, which we discussed at a previous meeting. So I'll quickly run through this. Project focus. So making sure it met the purpose of the program. There was a bump up for transportation to vaccination sites and equity emphasis areas. That was worth 45 points for the overall project focus. Project feasibility, to make sure it was something that could be done and be done within 18 months. That was for 25 points. The institutional capacity to manage a federal grant. So past performance, having staff available and ready to implement the project, that was worth 20 points. And then finally, partnerships or coordination was worth 10. The enhanced mobility's focus is coordination, so we wanted to be able to pull that emphasis in as well. Next slide. So an internal selection committee of COG and TPB staff met on April 7th and developed recommendations. There were 5 members who scored 9 applications based on the selection criteria and recommended funding 6 of the 9 applications using the entire $532,218. So the recommendations prioritized awards for payroll and operating expenses for direct transportation providers, and then also include transportation to COVID vaccination sites. Next slide. So here's a summary of what we received. Again, the 532 and change, and we received requests for 1.4 million plus. So the 9 projects, there was 1 from DC, the 9 applications, I should say, and 1 from DC, 4 from Maryland, which included some activity in DC, and then 4 in Virginia. Next slide. So 6 of those 9 were recommended for funding, and the types of projects we saw and which were recommended were mobility management services and vouchers like taxi, Uber, Lyft fare to get to vaccination sites, and then also payroll and operating expenses for direct transportation providers. Next slide. And now here's where I get to share what the projects are, which is always fun. So first is Capitol Hill Village, and they were recommended for funding of $90,000. They're in the District of Columbia, and it was for mobility management services for transportation to vaccination sites. They were already doing some of this, so I think it'll be nice to see them be able to get reimbursed for some of that. Next, Dulles Area Transportation Association, DATA. Again, mobility services, management services for transportation to vaccination sites, but with a focus on veterans. Of course, they have to be seniors and people with disabilities to be eligible for this funding, but that will benefit Northern Virginia, and the amount is $80,000. Next slide. Next is ECHO, and ECHO provides direct transportation to people with developmental disabilities. So this is for operating expenses and maintenance to avoid layoff of staff and to keep the vehicles operating now that they're starting back a little bit. Geographic focus is Northern Virginia. Grant amount is $100,000. Recommended amount. Next is Prince George's County Department of Public Works and Transportation. They have an existing award for a taxi voucher program to dialysis sites. They'll be expanding that to include transportation to vaccination sites. Total is 107 and some change. As you recall, there was a little bit extra. That 218 basically got plugged in there. Next slide. Regency Taxi will be doing mobility management services for transportation to vaccination sites as well, with a little added escorted service if it's needed. So the driver would become the escort at the vaccination site if somebody needed that. And that's Montgomery County, Maryland, and some District of Columbia. Total grant amount would be $75,000. And then last but not least, the ARC of Greater Prince William. They would be reestablishing their existing transportation service for individuals with developmental disabilities. So bringing back drivers and making sure the vehicles are in good repair to start up the service. Prince William County, Virginia is the focus area, and the total grant amount recommended is $80,000. So as you can see from the materials that were provided, every project that was recommended for funding was scaled. The selection committee was trying to, get as much out there as possible and try to benefit as many people as possible. So with approval of the request, I'm sorry, next slide. I'm looking at my copy, and so R17-2021 is in front of you for approval of the 6 projects recommended for funding and the amendment of the TIP to include them. I've already spoken to all of the applicants so that they're aware of what today entailed. Those who were not selected have been encouraged to apply again under the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 and or the 2021 Enhanced Mobility Solicitation. I personally spoke to them and will follow up again with them for a debrief and recommendations for improvement to their applications. And then also all of the applications that are being recommended for funding are currently federally compliant. So the next steps would be to apply to FTA for approval. While this can take time, there is pre-award authority back to January 20th of 2020. So there could be some reimbursement back that far for some of these projects. Next slide. I think that's it. So staff recommends approval of R17-2021, an amendment of the 2019 to 2024 TIP to include the projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. All right, so we have an action item in front of us. And so what I'm going to do is I'll make the motion to adopt resolution R17-2021 to approve funding recommendations and amendment of the FY 2021-2024 Transportation Improvement Program TIP to include these projects. Is there a second?
Second, Pam Savesky, Manassas City.
Thank you so much, Pam, for the second. Any discussion or questions on this before I move to a vote? Hearing none. Let me, we'll go through the way we vote again. Just a quick reminder, you're saying nay or abstention. Your silence means a yes. So District of Columbia? Maryland, Virginia, and WMATA and other agencies. All right, let the record reflect that's a unanimous vote in support for this action item. So thank you very much. And thank you, Lynn. And thanks to all the folks who helped evaluate and make these recommendations so that we could get to this point today. So thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you.
All right, next up, agenda item number 8 is our FY22 TLC Technical Assistance recipients. So this is our last action item before we move to our information items. First, we're going to have John Swanson, who's going to get us started on the Transportation and Land Use Connections, TPB's Technical Assistance Grant Program. And then I think you also have a guest presenter, Lisa Rother, retired executive director from ULI Washington, to also speak about these recommendations. So John, let me just turn to you very quickly. After the briefing, I'll then make a motion to approve and we'll take it from there. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, we're going to start with Lisa to kick us off. Lisa, can you get us started? Are you?
Got it.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. I am Lisa Rother. I've been around COG for many years. I was a local government planner in Montgomery County and the city of Rockville, and then I was the executive director of ULI Washington. I'm enjoying retired life, but when John called and said, would you like to serve on this committee, I found it to be a great opportunity to, participate. So it was really a pleasure to serve on the committee. We were a diverse group of members, both geographically and by sector. And because we had such a wide variety of expertise, the committee was able to have robust discussions. Staff was very good in providing clear direction and made it easy to review the applications. And we also received input from the state DOTs, which was extremely helpful to understand the perspective that they would have in terms of which projects were most appropriate for funding. There were 27 applications, and we looked at them through the lens of whether the project scope was clear, if it was unique, replicable, and forward-thinking. We also looked at some of the COG program priorities, including whether projects were multimodal, in transit activity centers or transit focus areas, and whether the projects would support the National Capital Trail Network. Finally, we analyzed whether the projects provide access for low-income communities and people of color, and that they were geographically diverse. Each and every one of the projects was fully discussed during the deliberations, and we found all of them to have some merit, although we had a limited amount of funding. So I believe we came up with an excellent selection of projects that could be funded given this year's budget. And John can give you a lot more details about the outcomes and the process.
Super. Thanks so much, Lisa. That's an excellent setup, and thanks for all your work with ULI over the years and for your help with the TLC panel. This was, I think I told you it was going to be easy, but it was, we had the most record number of applications. We had less money available than last year, so there was a lot of difficult decision making that went into this list of recommendations that we're going to be sharing with you. Leo, can you bring up the presentation just to get us started? Just some quick background about the TLC program. We've been around for about 15 years. We fund small planning studies and design projects. We've done this in all of our member jurisdictions, and we use consultant assistants, sort of local and national experts to do this work. The projects turn around very quickly, usually about 8 months. They promote diverse, vibrant activity centers. They make it easier for folks to walk and bike. And over the years, we've seen that these little projects really establish good planning and design foundations for capital improvements. We've measured this a few times and found that the program really sort of does result in some real change, lasting change at the community level. And there really is hunger for this kind of work. A couple of months ago, you folks heard about the Voices of the Region survey that we conducted last fall. Well, that really confirmed some things that we're supporting with this program. 63% of respondents in that survey said they support more wider sidewalks, even if it means a reduction in parking on street. 36% said they'd be more likely to walk or bike to transit if there's safe crossings all the way there.
And of the people said their travel habits would be different after the pandemic, 53% said they expect to be walking more. So again, TLC is really ripe for serving these kinds of interests. Next slide, please. So the program's been around for about 15 years. We funded 145 projects, $6 million. It's actually not a whole lot of money for that period of time. I think this program's really had a disproportionate impact. The program's designed to serve a variety of TPB policy objectives. You can see them listed there. Next slide. This year we did, oh, next slide, please. I mean, go back, yeah. There you go. It's a fancy slide, got it. Some things circled. This year we did decide to focus attention in our outreach on a couple of priorities that the board approved, the TPB approved last year. Transit access focus areas. Again, these are the 49 locations in the region that we think are really opportune locations for improving pedestrian and bicycle access to high capacity transit. And the National Capital Trail Network, which is an awesome network, a regional system of trails that would go from one end of the region to the other once it's completed. Next slide, please. So program components, these are planning and design projects. They're small, $30,000 to $80,000, very quick turnaround, 8 or 9 months. We get started fairly quickly, and we cover a range of different issues, which I described earlier. Next slide. So funding for this year is $600,000. The funding is sort of, we have different funding levels for different state level jurisdictions. And so the core funds are shared among all of our 3 states. And then we have special funding for Maryland and then special funding for Virginia from our UPWP funds. Next slide. We did a solicitation, which was 2 months long. This is what we've been doing for a number of years. Again, we received a record number of applications, and we had a total funding request of $1.6 million. So we left quite a bit of money on the table. I've been saying from the beginning that we're going to be funding a lot of great projects this year, and we're also not going to be funding a lot of great projects this year, which is kind of sad, but hopefully these great ideas will come back to us in one way or another. Next slide. The selection panel, which Lisa described earlier, included representation from the Institute of Transportation Research Board, as well as COG staff. We have a sort of a hybrid model where we determine our selection based on consensus, which is a process I think Lisa nicely described earlier. Next slide. So here's a sort of an overview before I show you the actual list of projects. Again, total funding was $600,000. We are recommending 11 projects for funding, and they really are, I think, more than ever, particularly focused on a lot of the TPB's policy objectives. All of the projects are in or near regional activity centers, and all of them are actually near, in or near high-capacity transit stations. And of those transit-oriented projects, 8 of them are in or near the transit access focus areas. Again, that limited list of opportune locations where we think we want to expand walk sheds and increase opportunities to walk and bike. And then finally, 9 of the projects are either directly or indirectly supportive of the National Capital Trail Network. 3 of them would actually be doing planning and design work for explicit pieces of the trail network, but 6 of them provide connections to the trail network. So that's a super outcome here. Next slide. Here's the list. I'm not going to read through the list. I think what we're going to do is just show you some highlighted examples. We have, but if you just, we can stop here and see that, again, these are really pretty small projects. Going to be serving a lot of different communities in a lot of different ways. So next slide. Just want to touch on a few examples. Next slide, please. This is an exciting project in Falls Church. I think people know this area pretty well, 7 Corners. It's like a fascinating crossroads for the region, a cultural and commercial crossroads, also multi-jurisdictional. and not always so pedestrian friendly. So this project is really going to be looking to find ways we can address some of those challenges, make it easier for people to walk and bike. This is a transit access focus areas because of the Seven Corners bus transit center. There's also not that far from East Falls Church Metro Station. So it's an exciting and challenging project. Next slide. In the district, we're funding a project at Congress Heights. A lot of folks know about this location. It's kind of got regional and maybe national attention because of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. But it's interesting, DC Office of Planning has done some recent local planning there and you know, sort of highlighted the fact that 45% of the folks in this area don't have access to a vehicle. And they said they wanted access to community serving locations, not just to the transit center, but to these 4 community serving spaces that are highlighted here. So this project is going to really identify bus stops and pedestrian improvements that can be implemented to make this community more walkable for the people who already live there, as well as the sort of people who are going to be coming there because of new development. Next slide. And finally, this is very cool. This is a that's not a pun, actually. I guess it is. Cool Streets project is the first project we've had that really focuses on climate change really explicitly. This project is going to develop guidelines. It's going to make recommendations on surface materials, green infrastructure, things like that. Things that are going to help mitigate the effects of rising temperatures on our streetscapes. So the project's going to develop standards that can be used elsewhere in the region, maybe nationwide potentially, but also really looking at this case study in Silver Spring. So this is an exciting project that's really sort of making a commitment to doing some focused work in a community on a regional priority, climate change mitigation. So next slide. Before I talk about next steps, a few closing things in passing. Again, we weren't able to fund over $1 million worth of our requested projects. There are other opportunities, though. I wanted to flag those for folks. The Transportation Alternatives Program, there's a memo in item 5 of your agenda packet. That's a federal grant program, and the TPB has responsibility for project selection for that TAP program. And the application period for Maryland and DC TAP applications is currently open. It's going to be closing in May for Maryland and DC, and the TPB will be asked to approve TAP projects in July. So you might want to think about that. Also, we're going to be starting a new program called the Transit Within Reach program, which is going to be sort of a sister program to TLC, focusing on 30% design only and only access, pedestrian and bicycle access to high capacity transit stations. So that's another project, a program that we're going to be starting up. The application period for that is going to be opened in May, and we'll be selecting projects for that in the fall. And then finally, Mr. Shrikant already mentioned earlier, the application period closed on an exciting new regional safety program that is really being operated in a very similar way to TLC, focused specifically on projects that are going to reduce traffic deaths at a community level. So the board's going to be asked to approve projects for that program in June. So with that, I want to finally thank my partners in the program, Nick Suarez and Ariana Cadunas. This is really a team effort, and thank everyone for applying. And we're looking forward to getting these projects approved and beginning the projects this fall. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John, very much. Also, Lisa, thank you very much. I guess what we're going to do here is I'll make a motion to seek to approve of the project recommendations. So I'll make a motion to approve TLC technical assistance recipients under the FY22 TLC program. I'll look for a second, and then we'll have any comments or questions.
Snyder seconds.
Okay, thank you. And then we'll, so I actually technically hadn't moved it yet. I was describing what I was about to do. So I've moved, and then Mr. Snyder, you're now seconding?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And so with that, now I was going to turn to see if there were any comments or questions before I call the vote on this. And I will say one quick comment, John. When I was reading the list and I saw Cool Street, I was like, oh, it's going to be like a cool street. And then it's Cool Street.
It is.
So I appreciate that. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? All right, not hearing any. Let me move to a vote then. So I'll go reverse order from the last one. So again, you're voting with a nay or abstention. Your silence means yes. So WMATA and agencies. And Virginia. And Maryland. And the District of Columbia. All right, let the record reflect that is unanimous in support. Again, thanks to the whole team there, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, next we'll move to our information items. We're moving to number 9 on the agenda. This is the first of our 2 informational items today. We are running about 10 minutes behind, so I'm going to do our best to kind of keep us moving. And Councilor Taveras, I think you might be unmuted. There we go. Okay, there's a little feedback. We're all good now. Staff's going to provide an overview of the projects proposed to be included in the regional air quality analysis for staff to undertake as part of our planned update to the long-range transportation plan. The review will highlight the new major projects and significant changes to major projects already in the plan that have been proposed for the update. These proposals are currently in a period of public review and comment until May 3rd, 2021. We'll have time today during the meeting and after the meeting through May 3rd to provide our own comments and questions to the agencies. Next month, we'll review those responses, share our own perspectives on the proposals before at least currently scheduled to be taking action in June. So I think I'm going to turn to Stacy to get us started. And I believe that we'll have both Andrew Austin and Jane Posey that will also join the presentation as well. So Stacy, let me turn to you now.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. Pleased to be back with you again. I'm going to leave my camera off due to some Wi-Fi training, but I appreciate your time and I'll look to catch us up if I can here. Why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide. This morning there was a work session by the board, as Mr. Chair Allen has described already. So we did have a chance to have a robust discussion on projects in the District of Columbia, Virginia, and Maryland, and we will be talking about opportunities to continue that discussion. For those that are listening, that session has been recorded and will be posted along with our regular board meeting. So as I zip through this presentation, there's a longer version available there. And I encourage anyone that's interested in more information to listen. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, where we are today is we are in the middle of our comment period. We look to request our board to approve inputs to our air quality conformity analysis in June, so that we may be able to begin that analysis, develop a plan, and bring the results of the analysis back to you, back to the public in April of 2022. Next slide, please. A slide we go back to sometimes, just especially important during the comment period, how projects come together. The board has established a policy framework that the TPB staff evaluate to see how we're doing against those goals that we have. And we work together to develop strategies, including aspirational initiatives, and those will come from our climate change mitigation strategy. And at the local level is where those projects are developed, often using best practices, but that's where they do the project planning and engineering. And they go through the local approval process before they come to our plan for the and for inclusion in our air quality conformity analysis. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just reiterate that with Visualize 2045, especially as TPB has been moving to this different type of plan, started in 2018, the plan has a constraint element. I'll mention those constraints. And then there's the rest of the plan that reflects our vision and goals and our challenges and the factors we must consider, as well as documents those strategies that we all together within our local context to implement. Next slide, please. There we go. So the air quality conformity analysis is a subset of the regional projects. And honestly, what's in our long-range plan is a subset of the regional projects in another sense. But there are requirements that are very specific. And Jane Posey will present the scope of work as to what goes into that analysis on the air quality conformity and the associated inputs. So we cannot include anything that does not have reasonable assumptions as to the revenue that can cover it. And we must include certain types of projects. So if there's a road diet and a lane is taken away, or if there is a widening and a lane is added, any of those projects that impact capacity, and most that use federal funds, must be included in that analysis. So it is a very narrow subset of the types of projects that we speak about more broadly. And it is also restricted because there are only certain types of funding that can be applied for certain types of projects. And we have a very mature transportation system, a very mature region as far as our land use, and 80% of that funding goes to maintaining the existing system that we do have presently. Next, please. So we've talked about the constrained element as a subset. Next slide, please. But when we talk about how Visualize 2045 is implemented, this slide is meant to communicate that that constrained element is one way, but not the only way that we implement the vision. The board's vision is very bold. It covers a lot of different areas. And to be frank, those policy priorities that are established through our vision compete against each other for funding and resources. And many of our projects might be addressed to address equity and improve access, as many of our projects do, but those same projects may not advance some of our other policy priorities. And so this is the tension that we always face as we try to move forward with our vision. But beyond the constrained element, there are many other aspects that are important, such as advancing bicycle and pedestrian projects, land use, telework, and other solutions that help us get us there. Next slide, please. I do also want to just make sure that as we look to that constrained element in the projects that Andrew will discuss, our aspirational initiatives, some of them can be implemented within that constrained element, while others can't. And this slide helps show where that implementation is likely to occur, inside or outside of that constrained element. Next slide, please. And we have had many questions about the climate change mitigation study. This will merge with the development of the plan and be incorporated towards the end of this year. Our plan language and body will largely be produced, but the strategies can be captured and reflected in the strategy section of the plan. So as we're developing our analysis, as we're conducting the development of chapters, where we actually get to the meat of it, which is the strategy section, this is where we'll thoughtfully reflect and integrate those strategies from the mitigation study that demonstrate the greatest outcomes on reducing greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. So at this point, I will turn it over to Mr. Austin to dive more deeply into the technical inputs for the update to Visualize 2045. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Stacy. Good afternoon, everyone. If we can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to be going over the public comments, the projects that were released for public comment. The public comment materials, the list of what was released is there. If we could go to the next slide. In the District of Columbia, we'll be expecting an upgraded bus lanes project on H and I Streets Northwest. This is between 13th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. There are already a pilot project lanes there, so this will be an upgrade from those. This will be complete this year at the low cost of a few buckets of paint. So the next slide, please. In Loudoun County, Virginia, we're looking at a new major project. The Commonwealth of Virginia and the county are putting the proposal for a new 4-lane collector road north of US 50 and south of Dulles Airport. This is between Tall Cedars Parkway and Virginia Route 28. This is expected to be complete in 2029, and the cost has been identified at approximately $110 million. Next slide, please. In Maryland, we're highlighting significant changes to a major project already in Visualize 2045. This is MDOT's traffic relief plan. We have this described in two parts, the I-270 component here and the Capital Beltway component on the next slide. For I-270, the revised description reads, the project will add one HOT managed lane in each direction along I-270 between the Capital Beltway and I-70 US Route 40, while converting the existing HOV lane in each direction to HOT. So the changes here are the previously managed lanes were described as ETLs, express toll lanes, in which all users would pay tolls, while the HOT lanes would exempt carpools, transit, and other vehicles with 3 or more occupants from tolling. The change to the scope, the previously proposed 2 additional lanes are being reduced to 1 additional HOT lane, while still converting the existing HOV lane to HOT as well. The completion date for the segment between I-370 and I-70 is being delayed from 2025 to 2030. Next slide, please. The revised description for the I-495 Capital Beltway component reads, the project will add 2 HOT managed lanes in each direction along the Capital Beltway between Virginia end of the American Legion Bridge and the Maryland end of the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. The other change is that the completion date of the segment of HOT lanes between Maryland 355 and the Wilson Bridge is being delayed from 2025 to 2030. Next slide, please. Actually, for the next 3 slides here, we've asked the submitting agencies to respond to an expanded set of questions this year at your request, questions that address the Regional Transportation Priorities Plan goals, the Aspirational Initiatives, and federal planning factors. For any new projects, we ask that the agencies submit responses to these questions. These tables are included in the packets of information that was released for public comment. Clearly, many of you have seen those already. We are working with the implementing agencies to fill these out for the remaining projects in the plan. So that is quite an endeavor, and it's we are definitely looking forward to reporting back to you on those very shortly. That is it for those. If you want to move to the next 2 slides, and I will hand it over to Jane Posey.
Okay, could you go to the next slide, please? Along with the project inputs, the TPB will be asked to approve the air quality conformity scope of work. The scope of work is included at the end of the comment materials, and it lists the policy and technical assumptions and all the work tasks that will be completed for the conformity analysis. This table shows all of the policy and technical assumptions, and if you start at the top, you can see that as we have for the past several years, we'll be analyzing ozone season VOC and NOx. Our emissions model will be the MOVES 2014B, EPA's model. For the conformity test, we have to show that each analysis year that the emissions estimated are below the mobile budgets that were approved by EPA. We have new vehicle fleet data this year, current to 2020. Our geography for the analysis is the 8-hour ozone non-attainment area, and this is an area that's defined by EPA. Our network inputs, Andrew went over some of the major changes, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about some of the other projects in a minute. Our land activity is updated this year. We have a cooperative forecast round 9.2, and that's an update from round 9.1A. We have our HOV and HOT facility assumptions here. In Virginia, for the express lanes on I-95, I-395, and I-495, they will stay as they currently are as HOT3, and that is that anybody with 3 persons or more can ride for free on those facilities. I-66 inside the Beltway is currently HOT2, but will convert to HOV3 when the I-66 outside the Beltway express lanes open. The Dulles Toll Road is currently HOV2 and will convert to HOV3 in 2023. All other HOV facilities in Virginia will remain as HOV2 throughout the end of the plan, which is 2045. In Maryland, the HOV facility on US 50 will remain as HOV2 throughout the end of the plan. And as Andrew mentioned, the HOV facility on I-270 will convert the HOV lanes to HOT3, and the Beltway will also be HOT3 when it opens up. We consider roadway restrictions such as truck prohibitions in our travel model. We no longer have Metro Rail transit capacity constraint in our model. Our analysis years are going to do 2021 or 2024, and which one we do depends on the region's status towards attaining the 2015 ozone standard at the end of this summer. We also will analyze 2025, 2030, 2040, and the out year of our plan 2045. We have a very large modeled area, and our current travel model is the version 2.4. And could you go to the next slide, please? So Andrew went over the major projects and major changes with this year's inputs. We also have the air quality conformity inputs table, which shows all the projects that are coded into the highway and transit networks and are included in the travel forecasting and emissions process of the air quality conformity analysis. This is a sample page from the conformity inputs table, and the changes from the 2020 amendment to Visualize 2045 are shown with highlights. The whole table is included in the comment materials packet that was shared with a link today in today's meeting materials. Next slide, please. That is the end of our presentation. And if anybody has any questions, I'm sure we can try to answer them.
Excellent. Thanks to all three of you. All right, so we are in an information item, which means we've got discussion. I do want to note that we also have one other information item on our agenda, which technically should have started 3 minutes ago. So just to help us keep us all in framework of our time constraints here. So why don't I do this? I'll go by jurisdiction to see if we've got some questions. And then depending upon how quickly we move through this, we can move to the next one. So let's see, I started Bomana last time. So let me start this time with the District of Columbia. And I'll turn to other colleagues from the District of Columbia to see if they have any questions. All right, hearing none, let me move to Maryland.
Mr. Chairman,
I hear somebody.
it's Bridget Newton, sorry.
That's all right, I see you.
Yeah, I made my statement at the meeting this morning, but I ask you all to take very careful look at the I-270 changes and proposal overall. Happy to discuss, with any of you, but there's some significant concerns. The city of Rockville is unanimously opposed to this, and we will be working with all of our partners at every level to try to make significant changes to bring transit, which is not really in this plan, to bring equity, which is not in this plan, and to protect our environment, which is also not. So thank you all.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
Information that addresses at least part of Mayor Newton's question from this morning. There are 3 commuter bus routes that serve and run on I-270 from Hagerstown and Frederick. They are the 505, the 515, and the 204. And obviously when they're on 270 and it's congested, they sit in traffic just with all the other vehicles. So I just want to let you know that there are commuter bus routes that serve Frederick to Hagerstown.
All right, thank you.
I say Rockville, by the way. Thanks.
I think I see Ms. Kostick and Mr. Wohan's comments or hands up.
Thank you. I also made comments earlier, so I won't elaborate now because I know we have a limited amount of time. But I did want to just have one question specific to the conformity analysis and how that's done. And I did just want to point out, I think it's really hard when we're looking at this, because on the one hand, we are not supposed to be looking at individual projects, and on the other hand, we are. And I find that to be one of the biggest challenges of doing this. And I think, we do need to get into the specific projects, but the structure is also not set up in a way that really allows that to an extent. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Also, just want to associate myself with Mayor Newton's concerns regarding the 270, 495 project. With regard to the air quality conformity analysis information, I am not an expert on these things, so I hope I am not speaking incorrectly, but it's my understanding that the current ozone standard is at 70 parts per billion, and that President Biden has indicated an interest in reducing that amount to something more like 68 or 65 parts per billion, which would be a stricter standard. And I'm wondering what the standard is that is being used in this air quality conformity analysis, and whether there could be a look at it from a stricter, kind of more restrictive ozone requirement to give us some sense of how it would play out with that.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to respond. The current standard, which is referred to as the 2015 ozone standards, that is at 70 parts per billion. The EPA has promulgated that. Once the EPA promulgates that, once Then there are federal regulations that are developed, and consistent with those federal regulations, every region that is exceeding those standards have to develop something called a state implementation plan or an attainment plan. And that attainment plan has to demonstrate that there are 4 large sectors that contribute to ozone formation. Transportation is one of the 4. So the attainment plan does modeling of all 4 sectors. The electricity generators, buildings, your neighborhood dry cleaning stores, schools which have boilers and heaters, and businesses, whether it is a data center or something else. So all of these sectors are they are modeled, and they determine how we can comply with the standards. That is what essentially is in a state implementation plan. And that document is developed. It generally takes about a couple years. And then at the end of that process, they identify, okay, for us to attain the standards, the emissions from these 4 sectors need to be at this level. So for transportation, for TPB, we take the level that is identified for on-road emissions. There are also transportation emissions that are off-road. We don't work with that. Those could be marine vehicles, those could be aviation vehicles, those could be locomotive vehicles. We don't work with that. We just take the number that's identified for on-road, and that becomes the number against which, when we adopt a plan, we do this emissions calculations according to the EPA model, and we report whether we are able to stay within that. In case we are not able to stay within that, then we have to adopt mitigation measures, commit funding to it, and commit to implementing those measures. So that is the process. So the prospects of the standards becoming tougher than 70 ppb are there. They haven't yet happened. So until that happens, and once it happens, there has to be a modeling to determine what would the transportation level have to be. So we don't know that yet. So for us to now do some sort of a sensitivity analysis without really understanding what could that level be, and for that level, what should the transportation sector's emissions be? So those are 2 big pieces of information that we wouldn't have at this time.
Thank you for that explanation. I do think just noting, I think that is something we probably need to be looking into for the future. And I wonder if there might be some aspect of that could be a part of the climate work that is being done as well with what needs to be done to achieve GHG reductions.
One thing I might clarify, the federal conformity regulations do not include greenhouse gases. They're only for ozone. There are no federal standards for greenhouse gases yet. And within those federal standards, there is no requirement for transportation, long-range transportation plans to comply with it yet. Those might come, but I just wanted to clarify. Our air quality conformity analysis is focused on the ozone, but the software also has the ability to calculate greenhouse gases. So since 2010, TPB has asked that greenhouse gases be calculated for all of those future years and report back, so that is one way the TPB has been monitoring, are we making progress towards our regional goals? And the reality is we have not been. We are quite a bit behind.
All right, I had Patrick Wohan next in the lineup, so let me move to Patrick first. Earl, I see your hand up, so I'll come to you right after Patrick.
Thank you, Chair Ellen. Yeah, I apologize I wasn't able to attend the work session this morning. I understand there was a very robust conversation on this there, and I look forward to catching up on that later. But I do want to echo the comments of my colleagues from Rockville and Tacoma Park, and really, I mean, we really should be at this point, if we want to meet our climate goals, we need to be looking at every project that we include in our plan through the lens of how it's going to impact greenhouse gas emissions and how it's going to impact vehicle miles traveled. And I think we also need to be thinking about the impact that these projects are going to have on land use patterns, because we have encouraged land use development in a way that causes more people to have to drive to where they get to every day, and that's and we can't continue to work in this business as usual way. So I understand these are ongoing conversations. I'm supportive of taking a closer look at the impacts of these projects, and looking at what we really need to do to get to where we to reach our goals on greenhouse gas emissions.
Sorry, I wasn't muted there. Mr. Lewis.
So regarding greenhouse gas emissions, even though there may not be a federal goal, the state of Maryland has a law 40% reduction in greenhouse gases from 2006 levels by 2030, supported by both the legislature and the governor. So we are monitoring greenhouse gases and are modeling statewide. I'd also like to question for Conti. I think we have a 20 plus or minus year trend of meeting lower ozone goals over time in the National Capital Region.
Yes, there have been 3 different ozone standards since 1995. Each one has been progressively tougher. And to date, we have achieved 2. And with the 3rd one, we just attained it. We are in a maintenance period. But the 2015 ozone standard, the 4th one, we are currently not in attainment of that. So there is certainly work to be done to meet the tougher 2015 standard. And as Ms. Kostick has said, there could be even tougher one coming down the road.
Right. Well, the one thing I'll say is that the region has never backed off on tough environmental standards, and I would expect that to continue moving forward. So that's not anything that we're afraid of in the transportation realm. I'd also like to add, I mean, the part of the challenge, the land use, which we all agree on, is an important goal. That's part of Visualize 2045, is the cost of that real estate. I mean, people don't make decisions to move out just because. I know I made that decision in the Baltimore metropolitan area a long time ago because I couldn't afford that house in the inner suburbs. So there's a lot of dynamics that we have to work on in terms of having more moderate and low cost housing closer to transit, because there are no laws that allow us to expropriate property to build that. So that's a challenge.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lewis. Let me turn to Virginia. If there's nothing else from Maryland, let me turn to Virginia.
Yeah, I apologize for interrupting, Mr. Chair. My hand is up. I represent the House of Delegates in Maryland.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't see you there.
Yep, no problem. So this is Delegate Corman. Hopefully I can make a point about slide 15 without Secretary Lewis getting a full rebuttal. But look, ditto to the mayors on the policy points, but I just also think we should be describing the project accurately, which is, and I put this in the comments, we're converting existing HOV lanes, it says. 18 hours a day, those are general purpose lanes that we're converting to what I assume are 24-hour-a-day hot lanes. So if this project is going to be in here, which obviously is a point of controversy, I think it needs to be described accurately, which is we are taking general purpose lanes for 18 hours a day, HOV lanes for 6 hours a day, and converting those to 24-hour-a-day hot lanes. So if we're going to have it in here, I think it should be described accurately in terms of presenting it to the public and to policymakers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you. And just one quick comment. I think that follows a general theme that I think was raised, and I was trying not to rehash all my comments from this morning as well, since we had such a long session there, around a real desire to see more information, more details, more description, to be able to then make informed decisions and full debate. So I think that follows in that line as well. So I appreciate that. Let me turn to Virginia now to see if there's any questions or comments from Virginia. All right, I don't see any, since I've missed a hand every now and then, just pausing to make sure I haven't seen anybody. All right, and then let me turn to WMATA and any other agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Secretary Lewis, you and I don't always share the same perspectives on things, but you hit the nail on the head. The best transportation strategy is a land use strategy. We got to figure that out as a region. One thing that is certainly worthy of celebration in honor of Earth Day tomorrow is that when we have managed 2 aggressive targets on ozone, we've accomplished great things, right? Go back 20 years, the ozone debate was a big debate. And I think that the planning process and what it's forced us to invest in is a testament to the success of managing to metrics. The clarification, Mr. Shrikant, that you provided for this group, I think is germane to the topic this morning, in that the current air quality conformity analysis as required by the federal government does not require us to set and or attain a carbon dioxide target or a GHG target writ large. But maybe that's not okay. Maybe that's simply not satisfactory for where this region wants to go, especially given the commitments that we've made in public and in writing to climate. Maybe it's time for not only this analysis to be done and daylighted, but for us to commit to a plan that achieves a GHG target. Just a thought for consideration by my fellow board members. We've done it before, we can do it again.
Thank you, Shyam. Any other comments from agencies? All right. Again, I know we had this was a continuation of a very hearty discussion that we had this morning, and we will have more. At least for me, I think it's actually an open question whether or not we're going to be able to get to a place where we're taking votes in June. I think there's a lot of work and a lot of information that has to happen before we get to that. So, but I do appreciate the full-throated and honest engagement from all stakeholders and all colleagues as we wrestle with this, and it makes us get to a better place. So thank you for everybody for doing that. All right, Conti, let me ask you a question here. Either we need to figure out how to get the agenda pulled together, because this is, I think, the 4th meeting in a row where we are running out of time on an item, or we're all just good talkers. And so we got to figure out how to tighten that up. Do we have time to hit this item or not? There's a part of me with Earth Day tomorrow that being able to talk about a climate change mitigation study feels really disappointing to not be able to get it today. But I also recognize with the clock, we have 7 minutes left. I don't know how we're going to get through that.
So 2 things I can make. We can try to have bring the briefing back next month, but in terms of today, particularly in the context of not just Earth Day tomorrow, but the summit that the new president is inaugurating tomorrow and the day after, today's topic was really something that Shyam alluded to. This region for the past 10 years has been working not just on the federal requirement on ozone, but also on climate change. It was one of the first regions in the country to take it on in 2008, 2010. So the 2030 goal that this region has adopted, 50% below 2005 levels, is what is expected to be announced by the president tomorrow. Even the country's goal is not there. The country's goal is half of that for 2030. So I think the region has been very progressive or forward leaning on it, not just in terms of setting the goal, in terms of actually evaluating and analyzing. There's been 3 large studies that have looked at just within transportation, what is the type of investments in effort? I won't call it investment only in money, but whether it is policy or our own approach to doing things. What are the kinds of things that we will have to do in transportation to reduce our emissions, greenhouse gas emissions by commensurate level? That is the substance of today's presentation, because it's been over 10, 11 years now since some of these studies were done. So we could have shared those 100-page 4 study reports with you, but we've put it in a few slides. But even that is going to take about 15, 20 minutes to just refresh. Here are the strategies we know that work, whether it is land use, whether it is changing our vehicle fleet, or whether it is the types of transit investments that are needed. So we know what strategies work. We know their general potential, which is what we have learned for the past 10 years. So that is the substance. So at least I wanted to share with you what is in the presentation. We'll be happy to bring it back next month.
I think that we should, but I appreciate you doing that quick highlight. In that regard, I do think it's something we both can be proud of as well as challenge ourselves, is that we don't go to the floor, right? Like we don't go to the bare minimum. So we do aspire. And I think as not just as our own individual jurisdictions, but regionally, we aspire to lead. And I think that all of us in our own ways do that. Then I think collectively, we as a region realize that there is immense value in that. When we look at our climate goals, it's just simply not good enough to say that we can meet whatever the federal standard is, because we know the federal standard is not where it needs to be. And it is our collective action with councils and mayors and counties and states pushing it. We actually can help push the rest of the country when we do that. So I think that's important for us to note, is that we will never settle for what the floor is, but we'll continue to work for what it should be. I appreciate it. All right, we will bring back this item on the next one. We're going to spend some time working on the agenda next time to make sure we can get this in.
If I could also add, the presentation and the memo has already been posted. So the memo gives a detailed summary of all those 4 studies that I mentioned, what's in there, but we can have a briefing. If I could, this morning's work session, something we tried for the first time to facilitate, to provide board members more time to have an open discussion. My sense was it was well received, it was well utilized, and my reading was that there is an interest to dedicate some more time next month, because next month the TPB will not be taking action. In fact, next month the TPB will be reviewing the responses to the comments and see whether it is satisfactory or what it is. So could I suggest members or request them to please hold 10 to 12 before the May board meeting? Please hold those times. We will try to have another work session next month, and we will hope to have for that work session a summary of all the comments and the preliminary responses also. And that same topic will continue into the discussion at the TPB board meeting. So I'm just taking the liberty, Mr. Chairman, to propose that to you, but I don't know if that's.
I think let's do it. Let's tentatively, let's ask everyone to hold that. I think that especially because we were not even able to get to all of the Maryland projects, I want to make sure that we respect our Maryland projects the same way as everybody else, so that we can make sure we have the time for that discussion. And I think obviously, given what I agree with you was a really good discussion. And again, I appreciate the staff creating this extra time to do it. I think there's an interest in continuing that as we move towards that. And I see a few heads of my colleagues nodding on this. Councilmember Glass, I think I saw your hand go up. So if you wanted to add something to this.
Real quick, now that you've made an extra minute or two, I agree with everything you said, Mr. Chair, particularly about giving more attention to Maryland projects. So I look forward to coming back to that. And also, I really appreciate the dialogue that you and Conti just had. And I was going to voice my opinion and share the same concern that many of my fellow elected leaders in Maryland just shared about the regional transportation network. But I was going to save it for this conversation, because you could insert that environmental impact at either point. And the fact that we're going to be coming back to this, we are dedicated to making sure that we live in a viable community, a viable planet. We got to work through these issues. And lastly, I'll just say I really appreciate Councilmember Kostick, the way the issue that she raised about how we approve some of these macro projects while being mindful of the micro and macro, right? However we look at them. And I feel that sometimes we get caught in that trap. And so the conversation that we have tabled for another day will refocus us on those efforts. And as you started this portion of the conversation, happy Earth Day to everybody tomorrow.
Thanks so much, Evan. Appreciate that. All right. Well, with that, it is 2 o'clock exactly. So for some of us, we're almost to 4 hours of TPB. So we're a little glassy-eyed, but we appreciate everyone's time and energy. As Conti suggested, tentatively, if you can, hold 10 to 12 on May 19th as an additional work session. we'll work to firm that up and confirm everything, of course, in advance of that. But otherwise, our next regular meeting is scheduled for May 19th, 2021. I look forward to seeing everyone there and wish everyone a very happy Earth Day tomorrow as well. And we are now adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.